Our story begins with a young man named Henry who was sitting in his room looking at a photograph. It depicted his younger brother who disappeared under mysterious circumstances and has never been found. After his disappearance, the hero's family lost another important member, their mother, who had not been able to get out of her hospital bed for a couple of years. Henry, without losing hope, tried to find his younger brother named Kyle, but the posters did not give the desired result, which made his nerves completely exhausted. Unable to stand it and left alone, the elder brother went to serve in the army. He was appointed a foreign legionnaire and sent with his native Korea far away to Africa. After the service, returning home, out of a sense of nostalgia, he opened the box where his brother's belongings were left. It contained a photo with his brother in an incomprehensible image and surrounded by unknown people, as if from the filming of a fairy tale movie or a mythical role-playing game. And here is Kyle's favorite watch. He has never parted with it because it was given to him by the person who was dearest to him. A brother sitting next to them, and that day it seemed that no one would ever be able to separate them because their happiness knew no bounds. A slight smile stretched across the elder brother's face at the memory of such a warm moment in his past life. A pity that the clock no longer works for some unknown reason. Suddenly, the clock clicked faintly, and the hands of the dial began to move by themselves, which surprised Henry slightly. Suddenly, Kyle's voice began to sound in the room, which took the hero by surprise. Shivering and sweating went down his spine. He had not heard this voice for so many years. As if by magic, he began to see the images through his younger brother's eyes and listen to the story of his life after his disappearance. Kyle said he couldn't bear to see his mother suffer anymore. He was desperate, but there was also something that made him hope for a better outcome. Lately, he has often dreamed of a world filled with elves, dwarves, dragons, and other magical creatures. There was a tower that was divided into levels, and all the inhabitants of this world could pass it in order to increase their power and position in society by climbing higher. And at the end of that tower was an elixir that could cure any ailment. And Kyle was well aware that this was not just a raft of his fantasies, but the real world. By connecting with that world through his dreams, he learned how to get there and took part among the rest of the contenders for the right to conquer this tower. Once there, he began his journey, thinking that his adventure would not last long, counting on the fact that he would take the elixir and help his mother. Alas, his brother was wrong, and the tower took him on a long adventure, fragments and memories of which Henry could now observe. In the end, he became the head of the most powerful guild of Artius. Climbing the tower with them, they became the main fighting force of this world, but this led to his end. His closest people from the guild, intoxicated with power and money, decided to kill their founder. Kyle described his life in detail as if it were a survival manual for Henry because he still managed to get his hands on the elixir, but he did not have enough energy and time to go home. The protagonist sat in an empty room for a long time, processing the information received, and late at night he felt strange sensations. A strange energy began to erupt in bunches in his chest, spreading throughout his body. This rush of energy swept through all the vessels of the body, and Henry realized that this was the power his brother had told him about. The power was growing, and it seemed that the body could no longer contain such a force, but the charge of motivation helped to contain it. The protagonist clearly felt the last moments of his brother's life. The devastation and disappointment of betrayal broke the spirit of the young guild leader. He was stabbed in the back by the closest people in the world, including his best friends and a girl to whom he had dedicated his love. That dark image was forever frozen in his eyes, which were as empty and cold as a gravestone. The hero felt better, and notifications began to pop up in front of him. One of them said that the rebirth was complete. Clutching the watch he had given his brother, he confidently decided that he would not let Kyle down and avenge him and fulfill his last wish to save his mother. His eyes were filled with hatred for such an unjust fate of the younger, and plans of revenge were born in his head one after another. After calming down, Henry began to study the main stat menu, which showed the newly acquired skills he had inherited from his brother with the watch. This watch was a clear guide to another world, and it was not for nothing that it conveyed to him a message in the possibility of rebirth. Squeezing his watch, he gave himself the command to begin his journey to restore justice, and the menu showed that he now possessed dragon blood, heightened intelligence, and advanced senses of perception. Calling his colleague, he said goodbye to the army and hit the road, as he had already put the house up for sale and burned his uniform. I quickly and accurately got rid of the phone because it was by it that it could be tracked. Aware of the dangers of the mysterious world, Henry prepared a survival kit that included knives, a capacious hiking bag, food, clothing, and medical supplies. The protagonist was calm and precise in his actions because he had years of military service in a special forces detachment behind him. The place and time were chosen wisely to reduce suspicion on the part of others. Now it was time to activate the watch. The hero began to perform careful movements, doing everything as prescribed by the system that popped up in front of his eyes earlier. In an instant, an abyss of dark energy opened up in front of him, filling all space, its streams opening up matter. Suddenly, the darkness receded, and in it appeared an equally black antique door without handles. A bright light began to burst out of it of its own accord, and this did not embarrass Henry in the least. And without a moment of hesitation, he began to walk confidently towards her. Entering it, he covered his eyes with his hands because the light was so bright that it almost completely blinded our hero. The first place, and exactly as my brother described it in his diary, was a huge stone hall with high ceilings and dim blue light. The tower was the entrance exam for newcomers to attain the title of God, and not everyone was capable of it. One of them was Kyle, who climbed so high and fell under the weight of betrayal. The protagonist said that he needed to show himself well at the beginning and gain the necessary experience. This should not be difficult with his experience and the knowledge of his brother. And we can't forget about the mask because he and his brother were very similar, and there were many people in the tower who knew Kyle by sight. This could jeopardize further plans. Suddenly, a talking sphere appeared above the hero, welcoming him upon his arrival at the tower. In his dexterity, Henry immediately adopted a defensive stance with knives, for he did not know whether it was friend or foe. The orb materialized into a goblin banker with a monocle over his eye. He seemed very gallant and serious. The goblin asked to remove the knives, as he was not a danger to the newcomer, but on the contrary, he was the manager of the ground floor. The hero said that he could treat him with disdain, but does not find it useful, as he can glean important information from the manager. The goblin immediately realized that the hero already had basic information about this place, which would make it much easier for them to communicate. He spoke about the structure of the tower and the scoring of points for passing it. At the end of each floor, there will be a list of participants who scored the most points. Each level had major and secondary tasks to complete, and the most difficult hidden tasks that almost no one knew about. He said all this with a burning cunning look, which was a little alarming. And with a grin full of pride and mockery towards the newcomer, he said that a month was given for one stage, and it had already started a week ago. And moreover, it was desirable to assemble a team of at least 3 people for the passage. But this did not bother Henry. Snapping his fingers, the observer, with interest in such a unique newcomer, announced that the hero could get to work. Bowing elegantly, he vanished into thin air in an instant, leaving no trace of himself. Having learned the rules, our hero set out to meet the adventure, ready to face new dangers with all weapons. And having taken the thought off his tongue, they did not make the hero wait long. A blow followed him out of nowhere. The lessons of the army were not in vain, and so were his brother's notes about traps, thanks to which he was able to evade the attack. But the traps didn't end there, and arrows flew right after him, deftly snatching his backpack, blocking each of them. Metal arrows showed the seriousness of this place to our hero. "We must not relax," he said. It was worth staying close to the wall and covering himself with his backpack so that he would be ready to take on other attacks, Henry thought. Less than a minute later, the attack was repeated, only this time from a different angle. The arrow hit the leg. A sharp pain shot through his elder brother's body. It took him by surprise, but it signaled him to be ready to take other arrows. One by one, they all flew at him, severely injuring the newcomer. He could only cover himself with a backpack. He had no other means of protection. Hard trials fell on the soul of our hero. Pressing against the wall, walking exhausted, he left a bloody line. But the more damage he took, the more he developed his skills, one of which increased his tolerance to pain. Although he thinks to himself that he can't go on like this for a long time and will rather go crazy from the damage inflicted on him. His will to live helped him in such situations, and he tolerated the pain and pulled the arrows out of his body. Using his skills, Henry disinfected and cauterized wounds with the means available to him from his world. The system immediately notified him that he had been burned, and his movement had slowed down. but immediately displayed an increase in fire resistance. Analyzing where the arrows were coming from, the hero replayed in his head the sensations he experienced. Among them, each time there was a slight signal. He was able to activate the skill of heightening his senses by concentrating his mind on danger. As if he had been electrocuted, he felt a clear impulse coming from above in the ceiling. It was clearly not delirium caused by pain. Grabbing a knife, he threw it with all his strength at the stone ceiling, exactly at the point where the core of the outgoing signal was perceptible to his senses. An army bayonet, a knife, slammed into the stone with great force, passing through it all the way to the handle. The ceiling shattered, shattering, knocking out trap mechanisms and a supply of unspent arrows. A smile appeared on his face as he could now easily find and destroy these annoying traps, which would undoubtedly make his passage easier. Gathering his strength, the young man rushed to meet the arrows, now knowing and feeling where they were coming from and where they were flying. Deftly dodging them, he increased his stats, and with each arrow that did not hit, his skill of agility grew. Whenever possible, I tried to reflect what gave experience points to the strength skill. Each arrow gave 1 experience. Even by deliberately exposing himself and taking the attack on himself, the guy improved the stamina parameter. After all, the more parameters he gained per floor, the more benefits he could get from the tasks he performed. Although he didn't have the opportunity to heal himself better, it was evident in the blood oozing profusely from under the mask. That's okay. There is still room for improvement, Henry thought, as he cleaned up the excess blood that was obstructing his vision. Such an interesting newcomer could not remain unnoticed by the observer. All the newcomers of the floor were displayed on his screens. You could see genuine interest in his eyes. Even experienced teams from the blocks above did not deserve as much attention as our hero. The observer said to himself, if Henry coped with the initial tests, it was not a fact that the next ones would not break him. And if he manages to cope with them, then his adventures will become very entertaining to watch. Finally, our hero approached the end of the challenge, which was prompted by the pop-up menu. The guy carefully studied his characteristics, how much they developed with the passage of this task. In his body, the increase in stats such as strength, maneuverability, and agility was significantly felt. All he had to do was enter the door to find out what awaited him next, and a bright golden light poured in from within. The streams of golden energy were very invigorating. They filled him with vitality, and the notification said that the healing of wounds was beginning. Our hero was a little surprised that his wounds began to heal without a trace on their own. Looking around, Henry realized that this was a resting place for beginners, where they could safely rest and recuperate. Having taken a couple of steps, the guy himself did not notice how he began to pass out and fall, because these traps battered him greatly, leaving no strength. The hero's first thought upon awakening was that he had lost consciousness very unexpectedly, and he had also noticed the features of a stranger in front of him. A stranger with a covered face greeted him cordially, waving his arms cheerfully in front of him and smiling. Henry was frightened and quickly jumped away from the incomprehensible character, wary that he didn't know what to expect from him. The stranger introduced himself as a merchant, reassuring the guy that he did not wish him harm, and telling him that he could help for a fee with anything. Literally anything that comes to mind and can exist in this world. With a snap of his fingers, he opened the menu of his store. This menu contained everything your heart desired, all sorts of different potions, mysterious artifacts, food, and all sorts of consumables. The protagonist, with a thoughtful face, began to actively study the items presented in the store. For now, he couldn't rely on powerful artifacts, deciding to start by mastering abilities, but the currency was his earned stat points. The seller said that they were conscientious merchants and did not inflate prices, although a bottle of water for 2 powers told our hero that they clearly wanted to rob him. Henry thought about it and decided that he would take the level reset ticket for all of his stats gained at the same level. The idea is strange for a beginner, but not for our hero because he has unfinished business at the level. The merchant asked him again if he was sure of his choice, and the hero confirmed the seriousness of his intentions. With a smirk on his face, the merchant also realized that our hero was not one of the simple. Such a request from a newcomer had never been received. After agreeing to the purchase, the seller said goodbye to Henry, saying that their paths would definitely cross. Likewise, like the observer, he vanished into thin air after these words, leaving our hero with a new acquisition. The guy felt his stats roll back to their original position, evaporating and steaming out of it. And here is the cherished ticket of returning to the beginning of the level. The principle of operation was as simple as possible. By breaking it, the player activated the powers, releasing a spell to transport himself to the beginning of the level, and this is what our hero did. The ticket was instantly activated, illuminating the face of our hero. It obscured his visibility in order to perform the movement as if in secret. Now that he had felt the ground for the first time, he could enter into a serious confrontation with the trials. Without a second thought, Henry took a fighting stance with a knife, with the eyes of a predator ready for battle. Again, the whistle of arrows sounded in the air, rushing towards our hero. But this time, the advantage was not on their side. Deflecting each arrow, the hero aims to collect the maximum number of stat points. This was the last run of the training path, and it had to be finished perfectly for the protagonist to be the best on this floor. In many ways, he was helped by the skill of the dragon's eye, which, unlike an ordinary human, gave incredible advantages. The eye made it possible to discard all the unnecessary color spectrum of the world and give it a clear, visible outline. Also, as a scanner, it allowed you to study various creatures in hidden places, showing their true essence. This time the test was over in a couple of hours. Compared to the previous race per day, it was a clear improvement in the results. And after looking at the statistics section, the hero was pleasantly satisfied with his result. The parameters of his characteristics increased significantly. Now he could compete on equal terms with other participants who had started the passage a week earlier. The words in his head said one thing: now he could take this race seriously and not fall face down in the mud in front of other players. Once in the room with the first level boss, the player immediately took the initiative and rushed to attack. The boss turned out to be largely improved fire traps. The arrows not only burned, but now also flew at twice the speed. In his mind, Henry knew that he had no choice but to stumble, and that he could not slow down for a second. After a time of deft parries, the guy got into the pace of the battle and easily deflected several flying targets at once. Heightened senses did not fail this time, and helped to quickly notice the floor disappearing from under my feet. As he pushed off and hovered in the air, he saw an unflattering sight under the open floor. A multitude of sharp pikes stared down at him with menace. It was clear that falling there was tantamount to instant death. "Then let's do this," said Henry, and wrote out a feast in the air, spinning himself in the right direction. He was able to cling to the edge of the ledge with his legs, and gathering all the strength in his legs, giving himself inertia, the guy remained on a safe piece of the floor. The moment of safety passed very quickly. The ceiling as well as the floor was also full of surprises. As it opened, it unleashed a wall of fire like a dragon blowing flames out of its mouth. The flames burned our hero deeply, a little more, and it would have consumed him, leaving a pile of smoldering ashes in place. There was no time to breathe. The hero created a sound wave with a powerful swing of his sword, cutting the flame in half. At the same time, it was possible to quickly run through it before the flames slammed the passage shut, and with improved composure, the burn resistance was reduced. Only after coming out of the flames did a spiked boulder rush towards the guy with the white mask in his blind spot. With each new nuisance and avoidance of it, the protagonist would see a notification telling him that his skills were being upgraded. Suddenly, Henry received a powerful blow to the stomach that caught his breath and folded him in two. The first serious opponent stood in the way of our hero. Then the elder brother remembered the stories in Kyle's diary. It was a brass scarecrow, clad in sturdy plate armor, without a face. It mimicked the player's movements. In his brother's memories, the scarecrow was able not only to copy the opponent's combat skills and strength, but also his magic spells, greatly enhancing them. There were few strategies against such an image, either to attack it head-on or to stab it in the weak spot. Of course, our protagonist has not forgotten about his powerful ability of the dragon's eye to assess the enemy. In an instant, everything lost its colors, leaving only clear boundaries of things. Henry could look unhindered through the scarecrow's empty body. And to see him as a black ball of energy, that was the weak point of the brass scarecrow, the guy thought to himself. Immediately, he rushed to the attack, to which the enemy began to swing for a retaliatory strike. Suddenly, a young man's exclamation came from the shadows, warning the hero. He exclaimed that it was necessary to hit the weak spots. Hearing this, the hero thought that he knew how to do the right thing without him. Approaching the impact zone, he dodged it, passing through his legs. Waiting out the attack and taking a couple of steps back, he pinpointed the exact place and time of the blow with a proper swing. Passing through his defenses, he plunged his bayonet knife right into the center of the target's chest, knocking him to the ground. As soon as he pulled out the knife, in the blink of an eye, a huge burst of energy burst out of the wound and blew the brass dummy's body into many pieces. The boy is dumbfounded by this picture. I just can't believe what is happening. Few people were able to easily defeat this enemy. The young man's legs were squinting, making it difficult to stand without support, and his face was enveloped in an expression of fear of such a powerful player. Henry shot a piercing glance at the boy, making him even more nervous. The hero wondered how the boy could know about the enemy's weak point, since he himself needed enough strength and skills to identify it. Coming closer to the boy, seriously frightened, cried out about what he was going to do to him. The hero replied that it was nothing, but only wanted to know how the young man knew about the special sensors in the doll's body. The boy, realizing that he was not in danger, said that it was possible to see the threads encircling the enemy. It was magic that powered the scarecrow and gave it powers capable of taking on the power and skills of the enemy. The hero knew that this was an unusual power even by the standards of this world. Among those who wielded magic, not everyone could see its flows, not missing the opportunity he asked to teach it. The boy looked at him in amazement, and Henry said that in return he would accompany him to safety, so clearly understood that the young man was stuck here. Without waiting for an answer, he turned and was about to leave, saying that he would not force him, to which the boy was frightened. And he objected to the hero how he was able to defeat the enemy without possessing magical powers. It seemed absurd to him. Looking at the remnants of the monster, the boy began to consider the offer made to him by the hero. But still, something did not add up in his head. And despite this, he agreed to the deal. Introducing himself by the name of Julius, he asked how he could be useful. Henry told him to just follow him, but not before he asked a question that bothered him. Why the boy was in a magical shell, such a question left the boy speechless. The dragon's eyes couldn't be fooled so easily. They saw the essence of things as they were. In appearance, the guy was no more than 10 years old. Carefully hiding this fact, he protected himself from the people around him. The protagonist said that despite his young age, he would not treat him gently like a child, to which the boy shook his head in agreement. With a straight face, the hero was enveloped in the smoke of battle as he walked through the level. One by one, his enemies were torn apart by his well-aimed blows to weak points, leaving them no chance of victory. Making crazy maneuvers, enemies simply could not predict the hero's movements, becoming easy targets for him. All they could do was fall helplessly to the ground under the might, and Henry's matchless movements deserved special praise. And Julius, standing in the shelter, watched every movement in surprise and fascination, trying not to miss a second of the battle. The white mask reminded him of his part of the persuasion, to which he told him that he had been seeing streams of mana since birth, as if with an innate ability. Families have developed and passed on their skills to successors for generations, honing them better each time. His brother was reminded of this ability of Kyle, an innate adaptation that was compatible with everyone, including mana. Other people had trouble adapting to this world, but not the younger brother. He could use anything he found like the back of his hand. After all, it was no coincidence that Kyle was the only one who chose an ancient dragon named Clayton. The boy gave a good example of how to feel mana around him. It was enough to imagine a river as a reservoir passing through all living things, and mana with its water. Upon understanding the gist of the game's prompt informed him that he had discovered new, hard-to-reach knowledge, and that he had been rewarded with several hundred karma points. Karma was the local currency and was a reward from the administration for achieving difficult tasks. It could be exchanged for many things. Here are the final doors of the first level, behind which there was a halt for the participants. A place that looked more like a huge square and resembled paradise in its radiance. All the characters gathered here, recuperating their strength. A lot of heroes filled the place. Each of them had their own class such as warrior, healer, mage, and others. Among them were many badly wounded, their wounds requiring long and diligent treatment, and the spirits of some of them were completely broken. Surprised people did not hide their interest in the newcomer, because a week had already passed since the start of the dungeon, and moreover, he single-handedly passed the first level. Young Julius did not dare to enter the hall, not believing that he could still reach it. Mentally, he was still among the monsters in the level, as evidenced by the incessant trembling in his body. Seeing his shaking hands, young Julius gathered his thoughts and exhaled calmly, knowing that he was now safe. He looked around the room to find familiar faces among the participants. It didn't take long to search. The team of young people looked at the young guy in surprise. As soon as their eyes met, the team's faces showed clear signs of embarrassment and discomfort. Julius was seized with an inordinate rage, baring his teeth and barely restraining his anger towards them. Henry asked if it was his team, to which the young man replied that he no longer had anything to do with them. They quickly switched from a decidedly unpleasant topic for Julius back to stories about mana and its arcane aspects. The boy noticed that it was difficult for him to tell all the subtleties of this case, since he had these skills from birth and did not know how best to tell a newcomer about it. Then there was a conversation between them about the divergence of their paths, since after the end of the training level, Julius was going to go home. Standing up, Henry began to slowly move away from the boy, waving goodbye to him, which was accepted by the young man with reciprocity. But Yuli's problems did not end there, because his former team members were sent to him. The boys' team was greeted with warm promises at the beginning of the first level, the stranger remarking on their high potential. That stranger was Bild, a member of the powerful guild of Honorand, who said that he would wait for them in the rest hall after completing the initial test. The guys were happy to be invited to such a good guild at the beginning of their playthrough and decided to become the best no matter what. Exhausted by the traps, they encountered brass dummies that were beyond their power, and there was no way to get around them. Terrible thoughts crept into the head of the team leader, that they would not get out of this place alive. The only option, but a very sneaky one, was the weakest member of their team looking helplessly at the carnage. Knowing that of all the skills, Julius possessed only mana analysis and was of no use, he made a difficult moral decision. The young man was too weak to resist, so he easily grabbed the boy by the collar and pulled him by force in preparation for the throw. With all his strength, he threw it into the thick of his enemies as a bait for distraction. They rushed to the exit, hoping that the boy would detain them long enough to escape safely. It was a terrible betrayal that Julius could not have expected. Because he was too young and naive, all he could do was shout for help. This act left a deep wound in his heart. So when they met, he told them that there was nothing more for him to talk about with them. He had hoped that on his adventure, he would meet loyal comrades who would never do this to him, and now he shames them for it. Asking how he managed to get out of that scrape and walk to the hall, he replied that it was none of their business. Unable to bear the shame, the leader of the team made a general apology to him, although there was a thing that worried him much more. He asked not to tell anyone about the incident in exchange for any request from the young boy, to which he received a categorical refusal, referring to the fact that he could no longer tolerate their disgusting faces. This deeply offended the leader of the team. He thought that such a young man had no right to give him such refusals and talk to him in such a way. To make matters worse, they told Bild how young Julius had sacrificed himself for the team. He could spill the beans, which would undoubtedly cause them to be expelled from the guild and generally persecuted by the rest of the member, his hand reaching for the sword of its own accord. Suddenly, Henry appeared behind the head of the team, aware of his dirty intentions, which came as a surprise to the scoundrel. With a quick movement, the hero cut off the villain's working hand. He did not even have time to react properly to this. There was a piercing scream, foam poured from his mouth. The pain was simply indescribable. After learning about the betrayal, the hero could not just go to the next level. The rest of the team stood up to protect the leader from the stranger. This situation reminded him of a very painful memory of his brother, how he was similarly betrayed by the people close to him on the team, on whom he relied in the first place. The two boys couldn't understand how he had crept up on them unnoticed and been able to hide from their sight for so long. The hero said that if they stab people in the back, they should be ready to do the same to them. The leader could not calm down, and with his remaining hand, he casually picked up his sword and rushed to attack his offender. It was too easy for our hero. With a simple maneuver, he went into the back and twisted the last working arm. These actions only amused Henry. He knew that their forces were not equal. It would not be difficult for him to deal with everyone. The team members asked what they had done to him and why he was sticking his nose into someone else's business. To this question, the guy calmly replied that he was just doing what he wanted, which made them stupefied. Twisting his arm tighter, Henry ordered him to drop his swords and stop resisting. his eyes showing that he was not joking. The commander, shouting with the last of his strength, ordered his subordinates to immediately drop their weapons. There was a clatter of rattling metal, and all three obeyed the order, fearing that the matter might get much worse. After completing the errand, they demanded that the hero let go of their leader's hand, as he was no longer in danger. But Henry wasn't even going to do that. With a smirk on his face, he laughed in their faces, saying that he hadn't promised them anything like that. Placing the scoundrel on the floor and putting his foot on his back, he twisted it with all his might, twisting and tearing the tendons and ligaments. Few people could endure such pain, and the leader of the group, who fell unconscious to the floor, was no exception. A member of the team expressed sharp dissatisfaction, but before he could finish his sentence a moment earlier, he received a weighty blow to the face. The blow was so powerful that it sent the dastardly traitor into a freefall to the ground and without any problems. Having knocked out a couple of teeth and lost consciousness on impact, the guy fell like a star to the floor. He could no longer disturb our hero. With shouts of threats, the rest of the young men who had been thinking for a long time also pounced. Their long swords seemed more formidable weapons than a small bayonet, a knife. 2 against 1, the advantage was in the direction of the opponent. Fortunately, in all other parameters, they were clearly inferior to the White Mask. Adopting a fighting stance like in the army, Henry calculated possible tactics against these amateurs. A quick lunge, a couple of hits, and everything on target, while the hero himself did not receive a scratch. The blows hit the lower part of the body, cutting the tendons of the legs, treacherously refusing to stand on the ground. It was only a matter of a couple of moments, and the battle would be over, turning to face the enemy. The hero delivered exactly 1 quick blow to each of them in the face area, leaving them no time for them to recover from the previous attack. And so the 2 lifeless bodies were foaming at the mouth, lying carelessly side by side, only occasionally sniffling bloody noses. Julius knew that the hero was very strong, but it was beyond his expectations. He could only guess how much power Henry had hidden from his eyes. The boy flying in his dreams did not notice how he began to drool. It's good that the main character noticed this and told him about it. Wishing good luck and caution to the young man, the hero turned around and began to go about his business. Julius shouted words of gratitude after the departing savior, and that one day he would definitely become as strong as he was. At these words, the White Mask advised him to visit a place in this world. It should help the boy become stronger. That was the end of their acquaintance, because our hero had a dangerous adventure ahead of him, which the boy was not yet able to pass. He remembered clearly the name of the flower garden in Greece that Henry had told him about, but he didn't know what it was. At the other end of the room sat a battered man who had seen the entire fight of our hero from beginning to end. He lightly kicked his companion to awaken her from her deep sleep, and with a little grunt, she began to wake up. The girl, like her companion, had gone through the same ordeal as her friend, and her uniform was cut in places and badly frayed. The man asked if she remembered those arrogant children who walked around with their heads held high and shouting that they were now members of the Anoran Guild. Of course she remembered them. Such loud and annoying people are hard to forget quickly. To her surprise, the man said that they were dealt with by a hero who had gone through the first level alone. Together they became interested in our hero and decided to take a closer look at him. Perhaps they could lure him into their team. At the second level, 4 doors of different colors stood in front of our hero. The system said to choose one and clear completely from all enemies. According to my brother's recollection, the color of the door depended on its difficulty, so our hero chose a black one, since when clearing it, a powerful vampire dagger dropped. Behind the door was a pond that had to be crossed to complete the cleanup. The pond formed by the water that flowed out of the giant who had died so unexpectedly here. There was a small stone under the hero's feet, and without thinking twice, he kicked it towards the water. The stone fell loudly into the water. This was done to check the danger of the local reservoir. The fears were confirmed. The stone immediately began to split as soon as it came into contact with water and dissolved in it as if in acid. An ordinary person can't live even a couple of seconds in it, so you need dragon vision, because somewhere here there is definitely a clue to this test. Immediately our hero saw a place next to him, in the wall that clearly stood out against the background of the rest. Without hesitation, the hero put his hand to the place where the dark energy was concentrated in the wall. As if by magic, the wall went underground, revealing a secret passage bypassing the lake with acid. In this passage, there was an old staircase going deep underground. The hero felt a slight coolness climbing the stairs. There was no doubt in the hero's soul, so he immediately began to descend to the bottom of the dungeon. Immediately he discovered white moss, which contained the spirit of the moon, which was often found in caves of this type. After tasting the moss, a person began to experience severe stomach pains, as it was not compatible with the human diet, as it had to be consumed with other ingredients. By eating it, the wild creatures began to radiate heat from their bodies, nourishing the energy of the moon in the process. This energy came from the heart, and when combined, Henry was able to strengthen his muscles and body many times over. The hero talked about the fragility of the human body and the need for careful handling of it. At the same time, somewhere nearby, a strange sound of an insect was heard. The sound came from all directions and slowly began to increase. In similarity, it resembled a lot of actively banging metal legs. This could not pass by the guy's keen hearing, and therefore he immediately reacted in the direction of the impending danger. Without hesitation, the guy abruptly turned around and threw the knife right into the monster's body. The knife hit its target, lodged deep in the belly of the red giant. It was a royal centipede. The creature of gigantic size, which contained the right monster heart, immediately pounced on him. Henry quickly ducked to dodge the attack, and the monster flew with full force into the wall behind him. A retaliatory blow to the millipede's carapace left no visible damage. Very strange, because the throw to the belly caused good damage. Apparently, the back was much more protected. Dragon eyes are indispensable, our hero thought, and then his eyes lit up again. The monster's weak point was in its belly just below its head, signaled by a dark blob. All that was left was to find the right moment while the monster prepared for the next attack from the ceiling. The huge carcass of the monster whistled down on Henry. Once again avoiding the attack, the guy deftly jumped on the chitinous back of the centipede. Henry changed the position of the knife in his hand for a more powerful blow. Grabbing it in both hands, increasing the force of the blow, he pierced the carapace with a sure and precise movement. A discovery awaited him. It turned out that the monster's defense was much more difficult, because behind the first layer of chitin there was an air cushion, and behind it the second layer of shell. Before he could finish his analysis, he sensed danger from behind, where the monster's tail was already approaching. It is clear that the blow will be very strong, so the white mass crossing his arms tried to block at least some of the damage. It didn't help much because the force was so powerful that the hero simply flew into the wall at high speed, crushing it into pieces. The internal organ was badly damaged, causing blood to gush out of the mouth, and the system displayed a message about the poison that had entered the body. A quick analysis revealed all of the hero's injuries, such as broken ribs and a fractured spine. Fortunately, the resistance to various kinds of damage was enough for the hero, while remaining conscious, to draw a knife. As the toothy maw was rapidly approaching him, there was no time to hesitate. Rushing into a frontal attack, Henry blocked the blow with a knife, which discouraged the monster. Trembling under the weight of the monster's body, the white mask did not give up its position one step, because it was not going to lose. Having thrown the monster away, the protagonist planned the next attack, since he was now sure that the weakest point in the centipede's body was its belly. The hero raised his hand to strike, firmly grasping the handle of the knife with his palm. The knife went all the way to the bottom of the blade, right into the belly, and blue blood spurted from the wound under high pressure. But this could not be enough, so the main character, without taking out the knife, began to cut open the entire body. There was so much blood that it flooded the entire mask. The blood-stained blade struck a control blow into the monster's cracked, chitinous shell. Henry collapsed, exhausted, on the blood-stained ground next to the dead body of the royal centipede. Turning his head in the direction of the monster, he made sure that it no longer posed any threat to him. Out of breath after an intense battle, the guy rolled over onto his stomach and took off his mask to catch his breath. Next to it was the moon moss he needed, which he began to collect with his hand. After his palm was full, Henry began to eat it without fear, not paying attention to the specific taste. A strange feeling of slight discomfort appeared in his stomach, reminiscent of the spirits of the moon that had taken up residence there. Having finished taking the first component, the hero approached the corpse of the centipede to extract the second. It was the blue heart of the monster that shimmered so beautifully with a mother-of-pearl color. But our hero was not going to admire it and began to eat it without pleasure, completing the creation of the miracle drug. The action moves back to the hero's lounge, where Build appears in front of us, asking what happened here. A team of traitors with completely blank stare, unable to utter a word anymore. Build thought they were strong enough to be left alone for a while. But someone, knowing about their membership in the Andaran Guild, attacked them anyway. With a face full of indignation, he realized that the attacker clearly had no regard for their authority. A colleague who interviewed eyewitnesses reported to Build that it was a loner with a white mask. Such a brazen attack on guild members simply could not go unpunished. The recruiter of the defeated team was beside himself with anger, so he decided to take the matter under his personal control. In the meantime, our hero has finished eating the heart, and the two components of the potion have entered the active phase. In an instant, the body began to return to normal, actively repairing and strengthening muscles, ligaments, and bones. As he exhaled, the hero felt better than before, having obtained the hidden skills of the Ice Seal and the Fireheart for opening the potion. For killing one centipede, the hero received more benefits than from clearing the boss, and his strength increased significantly. Right now, the hero relied more on his skills, but the level of magic power was still low. Further passage could be much more difficult without her development, as well as stop the development of dragon power in the character's body. The skill of composure, when used correctly, helped our hero at the beginning of the path, relieving the pain and allowing him to remain conscious. But the last time, because of the use of this skill in an inappropriate way, Henry was discouraged, feeling incredible pain. In case of various burns, poisoning, and other life-threatening factors, he was helped by the skill of resistance. Among others, there was the skill of accelerating thinking, which allowed him to quickly react to danger and make the right decisions. And improving at least a couple of these skills significantly helped our hero. After reviewing and analyzing the new upgrades, Henry put on his mask as he prepared to continue the dungeon. Bats were the next enemies, but they did not pose a serious threat. The ground was littered with bat corpses, and the number of monsters killed had long exceeded 100. Holding the remains of a bat in his hand, our hero extracted useful materials for himself. They were thin and sharp claws from the wings of mice, and with them, no less sharp fangs from the mouth. The hero took out a special potion he had prepared at the site of the last battle from the moss and poisonous blood of the centipede. Gathering the fangs and claws in a heap on the ground, he poured a copious amount of homemade potion over them. Having entered into an active reaction of these components, they formed a very flammable powder. The main character scattered the resulting powder into prepared bags with a puff on a rope. Next, he conveniently fastened them all to his belt, having quick and easy access to them. They were needed for the following monsters, forming colonies of eggs on the walls. They were blue ants, their canines ranging in length from half to 1 meter. The number of creatures could easily exceed 100, and ordinary ants stood guard over their territory. The problem was that the vampire lord's necessary dagger, which could drain the enemy's vitality and skills, was located behind this colony. The option of engaging the ants in battle was tantamount to death, so Henry, quickly rushing towards the monsters, went for a trick. The ants did not immediately understand the man's action and waited on the spot for some time, puzzled. The time has come for homemade explosive bags, which the hero skillfully tore from his belt and throwed. Falling to the ground, they opened up in front of the ants' faces, and the air was filled with dust from flammable powder. The hero also had his trusty lighter left over from his army days. Taking good aim, he threw it into a cloud of flammable dust. As soon as it came into contact, the fire instantly filled the entire space, absorbing and burning the ants. The loud squeak of burning ants, combined with bursting eggs, created its own fiery symphony. White Mask raised his knife to finish off the surviving blue ants that dared to attack him. The first one was not long in coming, for which he quickly paid with his blue head. He was followed by others, who also immediately received a harsh response from our hero. Glancing at the remains of the burning clutch, the hero realized that most of those destroyed were either children or unhatched eggs. Henry rubbed his neck in annoyance, knowing that most of the adults were still alive. Glancing at the battered ants standing aside, the guy thought that he would be able to deal with them after receiving the coveted dagger. After all, at the moment, a more dangerous case awaited him, which did not require delay. Suddenly, a sharp and loud noise reached our hero. Along with the noise, the ground began to shake, informing of the weighty creature approaching him. Huge razor-sharp jaws stared at the serene hero. This ant had wings that slowly smoldered after the white mask's cunning trick. Not only did the wings suffer, but the monster was also missing a leg that had been torn off by the explosion. Things were taking a serious turn for our hero, so Henry took a fighting stance in anticipation of the attack. Eyes as large and empty as an abyss stared intently at anyone who dared to invade the ant's domain. This monster was an ant queen, which burned with anger and pounced on the main character. His huge mustache could pick up the slightest vibrations in the air, and his forehead was sufficiently protected from simple knife blows. The speed of the insect was amazing. Even our hero with his skills barely dodged the first blow. Because of the long legs, it was necessary to keep a distance for the safe introduction of the fight, the hero thought. Stepping back, Henry began to study the battlefield for possible advantages. Unable to find any, his eyes caught on to the door of the ant's nest exit behind the boss. Since the hero could not safely fight up close without depriving the enemy of his advantage, he took out throwing knives. And with all his strength at once, Henry launched all 3 knives in the direction of the ant queen. 2 knives missed their targets, and only one of them hit the eye, killing half of his vision. Not missing such a tempting opportunity to attack, the protagonist resolutely began to approach the enemy. The monster reared up in pain, giving it a chance to launch a critical attack into the abdomen. Severing off the remaining legs, the monster fell to the ground, never to get up again. The ordinary ants ran up to the queen with a sad look to help her, but it was too late. Grabbing the massive handle of the door, the hero forcibly pulled it towards him. Behind the door was a temple which was lit by 2 fire bowls with a green fire inside. Against the wall at the end stood a statue of an ancient vampire queen, and in her hand was a mythical dagger. A smirk appeared on the hero's face as he finally found a hidden dagger that would easily help close the week's gap with the other participants. The main advantage of this weapon was the ability to inflict bleeding on the enemy. As they got closer, the statue's face suddenly became displeased with the intruder's visit. Henry knew from his younger brother's notes how to appease her, so he bowed his head respectfully to her. Without tempting fate, he snatched the dagger from the statue's hands. Once in the hands of its new owner, the blade glowed with a bright light and wrapped its hand in pitch-black energy. This hurt the hero, so the vampire weapon chose its owner. And then there were some tips from Kyle as the younger brother revealed the secret of how to treat him at the end of his journey. Holding out his hand on the altar, the hero resolutely pierced his own arm with the blade. Others would have thought that he had simply gone mad. But after this ritual, strange things began to happen. The dagger evaporated, leaving behind a slight dark smoke and a slight tingling sensation in his hand. The hidden meaning of the dagger was that it was originally an ability in the form of a hellish demonic maw. It could absorb the stats of slain creatures, which required immediate verification. Returning to the remaining ants, the hero began to clean them up. Monsters rushed at our hero with the last of their strength in the hope of defeating him in numbers. But there was a gulf of power between them, as evidenced by Henry, who jumped over and killed ants with ease. Having finished with the ants at the exit, the hero approached the corpse of the queen and climbed on top of it. Placing his vampiric hand on his body, he activated the blood mark ability. The red-black flames coming out of the hero's hand began to consume the ant queen dry. Having taken pity many times over in size, it no longer had its natural blue color. This picture caused fear and duckweed in ordinary ants, who came to the aid of their fellows. The mysterious pair of participants continued their search for the hero in the white mask, following him into the same dungeon as him. The girl was already starting to get tired of the monotonous walk through the damp cave, and the guy was trying to cheer her up. Finally, after a long time, they reached Henry's battlefield, which was littered with many insect corpses. They couldn't believe that a rookie who had done such a thing alone had really developed such tremendous strength. Examining the remains of the monsters closely, they noticed some that were clearly different from the others. The man noticed that the life force of the desiccated monsters was completely zero. Their thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise coming from the side, to which they turned. In front of them, as on the busiest highway, many different insects ran one after another. Looking at each other, they decided that such an entertaining event could not go unnoticed. From the hero's hands, another carcass of a desiccated monster fell to the ground with a dull sound. The previously obtained fire heart and ice seal were completed in the study, signaled by a bright glow of energy around the white mask. When he revealed his stats, he noticed a new constant stat, an enhanced skeleton. Now the hero was even harder to defeat, and the monster's powers also gave him a faster recovery. The guy's instinct told him that someone was near him, posing a possible danger to him. Out of habit, without hesitation, he threw his bayonet, his knife, at the area where the supposed enemy was. The knife whistled straight into the face of the young girl, who was unable to dodge it. Fortunately, she had her faithful protector with her, who deflected the flying projectile with a swing of his sword. Out of habit, the hero was already standing in a defensive stance, and his favorite military knife fell to the ground with a clatter. The stranger was beside himself at the audacious attempt on his dear companion's life. Asking the hero why he was attacking them without warning, Henry replied that he was counting on being hunted by the Anaran Guild. Realizing that they themselves had been chasing the man without their knowledge, hiding in the shadows, they immediately apologized. Having resolved this uncomfortable situation, the stranger enthusiastically invited the hero to become his companion. It came as a surprise to Henry, leaving an awkward silence in the air. Having refused, the protagonist was about to leave, when suddenly a man grabbed him by the hand, demanding to respond to his proposal. Henry said he didn't even know their names, and he wasn't interested in the team playthrough at all. The stranger was shocked by this because he occupied one of the leading places in the list of heroes that passed the initial level. The girl decided to help her companion by telling him that although he liked to boast about his successes, he was still a good person, and that their names were Doyle and Kana. Turning on his dragon vision, the hero saw their pure aura, which confirmed what he had said earlier. The girl added that they needed the hero to get one important artifact in the next level. Now everything has fallen into place, for which the heroes at the top of the leaderboard have returned to look for a strong newcomer. A powerful artifact was at the next level in the clutches of the ferocious Lizard King. This artifact was a crown that gave the wearer the skill of leadership and bestowed points of greatness. Henry didn't need the crown, just all the other things from the assignment, and Doyle happily agreed to such a good deal. The goblin, lying on the floor, whispered softly to himself that the people had come and that they were stronger than usual. This was the last monster of this level. Doyle watched with apprehension at the incredibly growing strength of our hero. And then the gate of the 5th level appeared before them, and Henry opened it. Once behind the doors, their eyes, accustomed to the darkness, could not adjust for some time. Clear skies, green grass, and many trees filled their next level. A token materialized in our hero's hand. Their total number on the level was 99 pieces. They were hidden in various places, and also no one interfered with exchanging them with other players. And no one forbade to take away from weaker players by force. There were enough insidious and greedy personalities in this world. Doyle and Kana weren't interested in these tokens. Apparently, they had already collected enough of them. The 5th level was characterized by huge spaces and a lot of content, so without the help of knowledgeable guides, it would have been difficult for the hero. Meanwhile, in the Anaranda Guild's overflowing arsenal, an intense dialogue was taking place. Bill's assistant arrived with a report on the White Mask. He revealed that he had been joined by Doyle and Kana. This news did not please the Knight Anarand, and he vented his anger by banging on the table. An emergency decision was made to gather the guild members and immediately nominate them to the newcomer. Night fell, the hero lit a fire and sat peacefully warming himself by it, immersed in his thoughts. He was amazed at the distinctiveness of his companions, who, despite everything, were always positive and did not remove the smiles from their faces. Doyle always functioned as a physical attacker, while Kana was in control. Their appearance reminded Henry of his younger brother Kyle, which made him reluctant to get too close to them. Doyle got up before his time, saying he couldn't sleep in the midst of such noise. Kana supported him, saying that only very annoying personalities could not get rid of them. Doyle didn't care much about the pursuit as long as he had his trusty sword with him. Pulling it from its sheath, he slashed blindly through the thick bushes. And he did not lose. He killed the scoundrel with the first blow. The others, retreating back, wondered how they were discovered. The villains tried to spread out over the area in hopes of avoiding the blows, but Doyle was significantly faster than them. As Henry watched the battle, he noticed an increasing number of winged insects that were rushing towards the enemy. It turned out that Kana knew how to control them. Such a difficult skill was rare due to the complexity of its use. A whole swarm clung to the enemies, who screamed in pain and terror that they could no longer breathe and stand on their feet. A couple of especially cunning ones, bypassing the battle, decided to attack the hero who was sitting quietly by the fire from behind. Kana laughed to herself, knowing that these fools had no idea that they were the victims in this situation. The hero decided to let them get closer, making the scoundrels feel more advantageous than him. All members of this group were ordinary scavengers who took away and resold tokens by physical violence. Often they not only took artifacts, but also took participants in the passage as slaves. With a sly smile, the head of the scavengers raised his blade to stab Henry in the back. He aimed directly at his head, not wanting to leave him any chance of survival. Magically, instead of the hero's head, he hit an ordinary stump with a knife. In a second, our hero found himself behind the enemy's back and repaid the bastard with his own coin. The henchman shouted the boss's name in surprise, hoping that he was still alive and would be able to answer them. Realizing that they were left without a squad leader, the scavengers furiously rushed at the enemy, wanting to avenge their boss. With a blow from both hands, the protagonist technically cut the throats of his enemies, splashing blood on the sides. The battle resembled a training session to hone skills. There were no clearly equal enemies for a good fight. With particular brutality, Henry chopped his opponents to pieces, lowering the morale of the scavengers. The remaining scoundrels, realizing the terrible difference between them, began to run away from the boy in fear. But our hero did not even think of letting go of any of these human scum. Their fate was sealed. The sounds of the battle subsided, and with them the scavengers lying around the perimeter of the halt. The number of bodies was 21, and they had 83 tokens, which was almost enough for a full set. These were the bandits' stocks, taken from weaker members in exchange for saving their lives. Kana and Doyle were told that the hero could pick them all up, as they hadn't paid him the advance for the deal yet. Henry carefully collected all the tokens in a pouch and tucked them into his large backpack. Remembering Kana's powers, the protagonist asked them to demonstrate them closer for familiarization. After gathering some firewood in a pile, Kana used her insects to light the firewood. He explained that these are fire moths, which in danger can spontaneously ignite without harming themselves. The next day, the team continued to explore the area, periodically engaging in combat with opponents. One of the species of which turned out to be anthropomorphic lizards, dressed in rags and armed with halberds. Once again, the battle was won by our hero alone. Henry, raising the reptile's head, proceeded to the unpleasant procedure of cutting out the monster's eye. Their eyes served as the material for the creation of the Ring of Giants, a powerful magical artifact that gives permanent improvements when worn. Kana stepped aside and noticed the trail of a huge reptile stretching deep into the forest. Having caught the track, the hero took the ground for study with a touch of his fingers. He established that these tracks were fresh. Also, an experienced tracker noted that among the footprints of the lizard's paws, there is a trace similar to the fact that someone dragged a human body here. They devised a plan to distract the king with Doyle, while Henry and Kana snuck into the female and steal her crown. A similar situation came to mind as a young guy being in the army, performing a mission in the jungle, tracking down opponents. After following the tracks for a few dozen minutes, they came to the lizard men's lair guarded by guards. Upon noticing the people, they hissed alarm words with a snake-like accent, alerting everyone in the camp to the intruders. Kana prepared a skill to summon insects, Doyle drew his silver sword, and the white mask bayoneted his knife. A huge blue leader of the humanoid lizards emerged from the lair. He was utterly indignant at the fact that wretched people had dared to enter his territory. Our hero did not experience such excitement even at the beginning of the passage of the tower, only during the first mission in Africa. As they made eye contact with the lizard, a spark of anger ran between them. The lizard leader's first target was chosen. Shouting a battle cry of sorts, he rushed to attack. Two powerful hind horns on the lizard's head spoke of its superiority over its other relatives. Taking his favorite fighting stance, the hero was ready to attack, when suddenly Doyle rushed forward at the enemy beside him. Doyle placed a good block, and when the two swords collided, they produced a lot of sparks. The Lizard King beat his chest and told the man to surrender, knowing that he was no match for him. To which, with a smile on his face, the man said that since their last meeting, he had improved a lot. The lizard unleashed a series of powerful attacks that sliced through the air in front of one of the strongest players in the initial stage. In a fit of anger at the futility of its attacks, the reptile unwittingly cut its subordinates in half. The guards stood bewildered by this act, unable to notice that the enemy had infiltrated the base behind their backs. Inside, there were additional guards standing by the burning torch, apparently warming themselves next to it. With light throws to the head, The enemies were neutralized by the hero, without even realizing who attacked them. As they walked further into hostile territory, they heard many moans of suffering people. In the cave, there was a cage with a large number of hostages, in front of which bones were scattered. The bones were human and covered in pools of blood, meaning that the captives were mere food for these lizards. At the sight of a couple of people walking freely, they began to beg them to release them from their confinement. The hero stated that they didn't have time to save people, which made Kana very upset. She said that it was inhumane and immoral, but the hero objected to her, reminding her of their task and the correct prioritization. He backed up these words with a light slap on the girl's cheek to calm her feelings. Excusing herself and feeling a little offended, she walked towards the room with the mother and her cubs. Looking at the bones, the white mask thought of the baby lizards, and that you could change their plan with the theft of the crown. Stopping Kana, he revealed the new plan, in that he was going to fight the queen. A colossal club struck ordinary lizards on the spot. The blow threw the monster a couple of meters, nailing it to the wall, and the brother standing next to him, silently hoping to avoid such a fate. Dressed in gold and wearing a crown on her head as befits a queen, she inspired fear with her muscular body and bright red color. Her children were still very young, sleeping sweetly in a soft nest carefully made by their mother. Ready to fight to the death for the sake of her children, she stood in front of the hero, blocking his passage to the crib. Pulling out a bag of flammable dust, Henry asked the queen if she liked fireworks. The queen realized with horror what the white mask was up to and froze in horror. The hero often had to throw grenades into the shelters of opponents in his world, so he threw a bag directly to the kids with a canopy over it. Screaming at the top of her lungs, the lizard queen rushed to save her children. A long club allowed me to reach and hit the bag in time, and the dust flew out of it. What is this? The red-skinned lizard thought to itself with its mouth open. Kana came in handy here, and her ability to control fire insects came in handy. The flames engulfed the already red scales, leaving multiple burns on it. As soon as everything warmed up and the flames dissipated, the mother saw the protagonist standing near the nest. He picked up the sleeping baby and put a knife to him. Another second, and he would rip open his throat. The mother could not bear to see her baby being killed and began to beg for mercy. Having dealt with one, Henry took the other in his hand, showing the seriousness of his intentions and that he would not stand on ceremony with monsters. The poor mother had no choice but to run to save her little lizards herself. Because of this, she fell into another trap of burning beetles scattered on the ground in front of the main character. Her whole body burst into hellfire as if she had plunged into the deepest depths of hell. Before she died of shock, she managed to grab her dead son, holding him tighter to her chest. Kana stepped closer, carefully picking up the red-hot crown she and Doyle had been hunting for. The Lizard King ran into the hall, sensing something was wrong. He gave up the battle and rushed to his wife, but he did not have enough time. Doyle himself followed him. The lizard couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't imagine a worse situation. Vuan, who never sheds tears, could not contain his emotions. The king swore to avenge her death. But for revenge, he had to resort to the dark ritual of the lizards, eating the lizard most precious to his heart. In proportion to the volume eaten, it gained body weight, increasing in size many times over. Henry could tell at a glance that things were starting to smell like kerosene. Raising its sword high above it, the lizard slammed it into the ground with great magical energy. The king was weaker than his queen, but with the help of a dark ritual, he was able to absorb all of her power. Thinking about what to do, the hero heard Kana's voice in his head. With the help of her moth, she connected the thoughts of the entire team. After discussing the plan of action, the hero took the first step towards its implementation, coming out of cover to the enemy. Turning on his dragon vision, he saw a weak spot at the end of the chieftain's weighty sword. The maneuver seemed very risky, but there was nowhere to go. The main character clearly put the knife under the gap in the sword. The bayonet knife went into a small crack, splitting it and getting stuck in it. The king had to take his sword away for a blow with his hand, hoping to catch the guy in this way. By inertia, the blade sank deep into the ground, opening a gap in the king's defenses. Then it was Doyle's turn. Biding his time in cover, he did not miss the chance to strike with the whirlwind of his weapon, slicing through his chest. And the icing on the cake was the girl's fiery attack right in the face of the helpless opponent. Madness consumed the king, causing him to still stand on his feet with blood-red eyes and wounds. Gathering all his will in his hands, The lizard wanted to kill everyone at once with its strongest fire attack on the area. Henry can't let that happen, and he interrupted the execution of this ability in a moment. Doyle didn't think that was enough, so he bought some time by attacking. Breathing heavily and exhausted to the limit, the lizard greedily gulped air through its mouth, trying in vain to gain strength. Flying like lightning under his feet and cutting his ligaments, the hero did not even think of giving indulgence. His legs no longer supported his body, grasping for his sword stuck in the ground, the mad leader trying to keep himself from falling to the ground. Then suddenly a hand was placed on the back of his head, from which the energy of the vampire was already beginning to come out. The face of the demonic vampire penetrated the lizard's head, which in turn threatened to let go of its head. The king's last will is to take the hero with him to the next world, swallowing him up in hellfire. Henry's white mask began to crack from the high heat, but the hero stood his ground. Doyle and Kana began to worry about their crew member. Even from afar, the heat of the flames washed over them. The situation with the fire was saved by the draining of the enemy's vitality and high resistance to burns. In just a couple of minutes, the lizard's dry body collapsed to the ground. Henry immediately began to study his newfound powers, and his friends ran to make sure that everything was okay with the hero. Still, such an exhausting fight did not go away with impunity. For the main character, the team members helped him sit on a rock to rest. After the battle, the first thing Kana and Doyle did was to free all the prisoners imprisoned in the dungeon, for which they began to thank their saviors. The prisoner immediately recognized the leaders of the table of participants, which caused fake embarrassment on the part of the lover of showing off. Still, his conscience got the better of him and forced him to tell the truth that the two of them were only helping the White Mask. They took a quick glance at the resting hero, remembering an earlier meeting with him. Immediately, they were overcome with anger, and their faces twisted into a horrible grimace of disgust, remembering how they were ignored while behind bars and asking for help. The White Mask proved the need to leave them to their fate and deal with things more important than them. They told Doyle about the situation and their personal attitude towards him, not considering the hero to be a human after such an act. Doyle looked down with contempt at the scoundrel who dared to say such a thing to him about his comrade. In the end, they were saved anyway, and it was not for them to judge his actions if they were caught in such a stupid way. Most importantly, he was the strongest of them all, and when the rest of the survivors heard this, they turned their backs on him who had said it. After admitting his foolishness, the survivor approached the exhausted Henry and asked him for forgiveness, offering additional words of gratitude. The comrades of the White Mask confirmed the fact that according to the agreement, they take the crown for themselves, with which the hero agreed. Doyle briskly ran up to the protagonist and, nudging him on the shoulder, said that he knew from the beginning that he was a good guy. Now it was time to collect the rewards that had been contractually owned by Henry, one of which was sticking right out of the ground where the boss had been defeated. And as a good addition, a small knife that was great as a replacement for already quite worn knives. Suddenly, a blue portal opened from the ceiling to greet the participants. A mysterious merchant crawled out of it, who was already aiming to buy up the rewards he got with clearing the lair of the Lizard King's boss. The main reward was a magic crystal of a high standard. The hero was well aware of this, and without waiting for the merchant's offer, he named the price of 200 tokens. With every second of delay, Henry added 100 tokens to the cost. At the mark of 400, the merchant could not stand it and asked to stop. The king's sword and the right to own the lair went to this crystal, but the merchant said that the hero was simply stealing it. Because of these words, Henry demanded a new magic mask to replace the usual broken one. The merchant burned with indignation, thinking that this was beginning to resemble the most ordinary banditry or fraud. After completing the transaction and saying goodbye to the hero, the seller hurriedly retired back to the portal before the hero began to bargain with him again. Things were gaining serious momentum when the merchant began to buy magic stones to create powerful artifacts. This meant that the tower was the beginning of wars between many guilds that would fight for leadership in this world. But so far, this had nothing to do with our hero, because his next task was a snake named Akasha. Kana, after finishing her conversation with Doyle, approached Henry with a friendly smile and asked about the possibility of forming a team with them. Her face lit up with a fighting spirit and joy, because together they were able to overcome all the challenges and take the lead in the list of rookies. The protagonist refused their request, as he initially said that he had his own goals in this playthrough, to which Doyle smiled with understanding. After exiting the cave into the forest, they continued to kill the monsters in the area in order to create the safest possible zone for the freed captives. A huge number of people, tired of being out of the will for a long time, stood behind the backs of the heroes who tirelessly shredded the monsters. One of these poor fellows approached Kong and asked him to give them some food, as they had not eaten anything for a long time. Because of their kindness and naivety, this couple always went to the aid of those in need, despite the fact that they could easily be betrayed. And so it was, for the suspicious-looking prisoner immediately took all the food given to him to the conspirator at his request. With his dark soul, he harbored a sinister plan to betray his saviors, and food could restore their strength to carry it out. Licking his lips greedily, he was already anticipating the sweet fruits of the insidious plan. According to his idea, the heroes were too tired after a series of incessant battles, and it was possible to deal with them calmly. Only our hero stood out for his mysteriousness and could violate everything planned. The conspirators had too little information about the White Mask, and his terrifying, demonic gaze was chilling to the bone. The two, together with the hero, decided to take these unfortunates out of the swamps to a safe zone, but they slowed them down too much by constantly asking for rest. With great empathy, Doyle could not refuse those in need of their request. This was the right moment to attack the unsuspecting heroes. The plan came together as it should. Not far from them was a whole group of trained scavengers, waiting for the command to attack. The smile did not leave the villain's face. In his mind, this whole situation seemed to him trivial, no more difficult than taking a candy from a child. But it wasn't until he relaxed for a second and let his guard down that he came face to face with Henry, who had been watching him for a long time. An unnatural human screech rang out from behind, causing Kana and Doyle to turn around. Without hesitation, Henry slit the throat of the main instigator of the dirty conspiracy, causing panic in the group of wanderers. Turning on his heightened senses, the protagonist easily identified the rest of the conspirators and instantly pounced on them. The traitors did not understand how they had been found out and what they had miscalculated. The only thing left for them to do was to run away in panic. Although it was completely pointless against the White Mask, his skills and abilities had long since surpassed ordinary people like them. But then Doyle appeared in front of Henry, blocking his way. He was confused and did not understand why the hero was doing this. White Mask quickly explained their current situation, saying that a betrayal was being prepared against them. And as a confirmation of his words, Doyle could simply look around. After all, the conspirators had already begun to surround them, and so they took up fighting stances, ready to fight back. The people who had been hiding behind the crew's backs while they were killing the monsters a second ago had already surrounded them with swords, accepting the scavengers' reinforcements. In all ordinary players who did not agree to betrayal, they simply killed in the same place without wasting time. Henry, meanwhile, aware of additional reinforcement groups in the vicinity, rushed to eliminate them. These were not ordinary bandits. They used a scheme with fake wounded players who asked for help from well-armed heroes passing by. They made deals with monsters after ambushing and defeating a naive player. They divided the loot, the monsters took a person prisoner, and the scavengers got all the artifacts. A special amulet from which the voices of robbers could be heard was an analog of a walkie-talkie in this world. The commanders of the scavenger groups, who were sitting in ambush, were already discussing how they would divide the reward from the killed heroes. It was a great luck for them to catch such important players who were at the top of the leaderboard. The argument was mainly over Doyle's sword, which could not be shared. But suddenly, all voices died down, which caused indignation in the last scavenger. A blood-stained amulet lying on the ground uttered the voice of the last scoundrel who summoned his colleagues. Jumping to his feet, he realized that they were no longer alive, for it was too careless to assume. A tormented comrade approached him from behind him, who whispered softly that a demon was coming. And this demon was already standing behind the scoundrel, like a wolf watching an innocent sheep from an ambush. The murderer's cold gaze ran down the scavenger's back, foreshadowing his imminent demise. Somewhere not far from this terrible hunt, an unequal battle of an entire gang of well-armed men against a couple of leaders of the list continued. Already tired from the battle, Doyle did not hope for help when suddenly a knife flew into the back of his opponent's head. Henry joined the fight, having managed to cut off the rescue ends of the scavengers. He returned to help his comrades. Kana mercilessly sent a swarm of insects at her enemies, enveloping them from head to toe in small creatures. The morale of the rookie robbers was broken, and all Doyle had to do was finish off the fleeing ones in the back. The lucky ones were able to surrender with their worthless lives intact. They knelt and begged for mercy. But Doyle was furious. He said that such people had no place in this world, and there was only one way for them. Pulling out his great sword of kings, the man began to slash down those who surrendered one by one. The battlefield was strewn with the corpses of various people, a picture that was not a pleasant one. When they were done with everyone, Doyle and Kana sat down on their supplies and stared languidly at the floor, digesting the whole situation. Unaccustomed to people being inherently treacherous and evil, Doyle was disappointed to realize that the people he wanted to save had betrayed him, and it had all been in vain. Henry came over and said it was hard to get used to, and Doyle replied that he didn't understand how a white mask could tolerate such a thing. Doyle massaged his face with his hands, trying to bring himself to his senses, saying he didn't know who to believe. Now he spoke with apprehension about the main character, since his composure in such situations is not inherent in a normal person. At this point, Henry suggested that they part ways. Their life views and goals were too different, so it is worth ending their journey here. Kana didn't understand why Doyle had agreed to part ways with the white mask, since he had done so much for them. To which the guy said to take a closer look at the things left by the garbage collectors. One of the swords bore the mark of Honoranda, a guild belonging to one of the most dangerous clans in the world. Its name was the Blue Lily. Such a powerful family couldn't just put their hands on newcomers for no particular reason. Previously, Brother Henry's other controlling guild stood above the rookie levels, but after its dissolution, the Blue Lily created Anoran to take over these levels. They were not satisfied with the previous system, or they had their own ulterior motives that few people knew about. In the meantime, the sad news of the scavengers had been brought to Commander Bill's room. Bill just couldn't believe that so many trained people had been killed. Realizing the seriousness of what was happening, the leader gave the order to assemble the first group of Honoranan's valor. The messenger was surprised, as this group included an elite of 3 who had been sent by the Lily clan straight from their island. There was too little information about the white mask, and Bill decided to go hunting with them. Suddenly, the guards in the camp shouted about the sudden attack, and the walls of the building shook with powerful blows. A second later, the stone wall shattered into pieces, much to the surprise of the chapter. In the gaping hole as the dust fell, there were visible silhouettes of 2 fighters. It was Doyle, drenched in the blood of his enemies, and Khan. Doyle unleashed a powerful roar skill that stunned the Anren men in the room. Bill charged, crossing swords with his attacker, Shiur, and shouted that it was time to have fun with the son of the Steel Lion. That man was Doyle. The action returned to the protagonist, who had already reached the orc camp in the Rocky Mountains. Getting closer unnoticed, the guy blew off the heads of the guards with a series of accurate blows, leaving one alive. Holding a knife to his throat and pinning the disarmed orc against the wall, Henry wanted to extract the information he needed from him. Our hero inquired about a place that the orcs must have known. It was a hunter's house, which was also located in the mountains. There was an informant who helped Kyle in his search for the mystical Akashic snake that was hiding in his hidden cave. Thanks to the orc's tip, Henry quickly reached the house he needed, which stood on the edge of the cliff. Slowly approaching the house so as not to disturb the occupant, the white mask knocked on the closed wooden door. The master was behind him, holding the carcass of a freshly killed animal, the hunter being a dark elf named Agil, Kyle's first teacher. The elf inquired about what the stranger had forgotten near his house, to which Henry replied that he was looking for the elf Agil, about whom their mutual acquaintance Bram had told him. The elf pressed his hand to his face in disappointment, saying to himself that he had asked his friend not to tell anyone else about him. Frustrated, Agil had no choice but to good-naturedly welcome the intruder into his home. Upon entering the house filled with weapons, the white mask revealed that he was looking for the artifact, Diana's tear. This tear was a pure bundle of Akashic snake energy, which was perfect as bait for it. In order to obtain it, Agil had a test which he said was simple. It was enough to touch the fleeing elf 15 minutes later. As a newcomer, Henry was given an advantage. Agil vowed that he would only use one hand for his spells. As soon as the start was given, the dark elf vanished into thin air, his movements like the wind. But that wasn't a problem for our hero, who had evolved Dragon Eyes. A significant disadvantage of the elf's skill, The lightning-fast step left behind waves by which it was possible to know where he had moved. Seeing the end point of the waves, Henry took out and threw the knife at the place where the hidden elf was supposed to be. And this time, the protagonist's skills did not fail him and declassified the nimble Agwal, forcing him to dodge cold weapons. The dark elf was amazed at the boy's unexpected abilities, but it wasn't enough to win. Therefore, jumping off the secluded place, Agwal used the skill again and also left footprints in the air, moving to another point. It was useless because, to Henry's eyes, the green streaks of wind accurately indicated the trajectory of the enemy's movement. This time, the elf moved to the crown of the burnt tree, where the next knife was immediately sent. The dagger flew just a few centimeters from the target, almost grazing his left forearm. Realizing that his new hiding place had been discovered, Agwal tried to run away as before, but a hand tried to grab him out of nowhere. The protagonist ended up right behind, also moving to a tree with incredible speed. The goal of capture was not achieved, so the elf stubbornly tried to break the distance between him and the hero. Before leaving the tree, the hunter was caught by his left working arm, leaving him unable to move with the skill. After that, our hero caught the elf again 7 more times without any problems, to which he asked in surprise what his secret was. Henry replied that it was a secret. As promised, Agwal escorted the protagonist to the house in order to get the necessary artifact from a secluded place. The dark elf handed over the bag, and the white mask thought of the elf's prostate, and that anyone could easily steal it from the hunter by checking the house properly. It was necessary to handle the tear carefully, as careless use of it could release all the energy, causing a big explosion. Henry remembered that the system had said that there was another reward that would be received if he asked the elf about it. Agwal then handed over the Book of the Lightning Movement skill, which was a spell cast by the elite Dark Elves. Immediately studying it, the hero felt how his body was filled with lightness, and his physical strength increased many times over. Agwal wondered what he needed the tear for, since the white mask didn't look like an alchemist or a magician. Henry said that he wanted to kill the snake Akasha, and the elf said in disappointment that it had already been defeated by the first and second places on the list of newcomers. These leaders were Brother Endor and Sister Punti, who had also visited the Tear Hunter before. The hero had no words. He was looking at the place of a fierce battle where there was blood everywhere and cracks in the rocks. How did they manage to find out the whereabouts of the boss, about whom only the former guild of the younger brother had information? Turning his head, the hero could not believe the picture before him. A whole squad of high-level heroes couldn't defeat Akasha, and then she was defeated by a couple of people. What were their incredible strengths? After examining the remains better, Henry discovered that the boss's most essential components, such as poison and energy, had been taken from him. Taking off his mask, the hero took a breath of fresh air to find a solution to his current problem, as the task of reaching the top of the list became much more difficult. In addition, the restoration of his hereditary skills required a great deal of energy, which is what Akasha was for. It's a good thing that the protagonist noticed the strange footprints of the orcs who extracted something from the skull of the snake. This gave hope to Henry. At this time, Payne, one of the elites of the first group, was informed that Build was assembling a team to hunt down newcomers. Payne showed little interest in the case, citing his busy schedule. He said that he was now spending a lot of energy to maintain his leading 5th position on the list. He could not return to the clan by taking lower places. The messenger said that the group would be led by Build himself, and as a reward he would give all of Anaron's tokens to those who caught the newcomers. And also the newcomers killed the entire second group and took all their tokens. Payne could not miss the opportunity to take all the points and immediately become number 1. By using the new lightning step skill over and over again, Henry leveled it up. Henry made it to the orc cave, following the tracks he had left behind. The cave had an unusual appearance. It was decorated with many memorial bowls with fire, and in the depths there was an abyss with a suspension bridge. Arriving at the place where the orcs were gathering, the first thing the guy heard was the loud beating of drums and the roar of the crowd. Huge war orcs knelt in front of the altar, near which stood a guard and a shaman. On the altar itself lay the main ingredient of the strange ritual, the brains of the slain Akashic snake. Behind the altar was a pile of bodies of slain monsters, among which could be seen goblins, lizard men, and various forest animals. The shaman began to prepare the ritual. He began to shout strange mantras in the orc language to the entire hall. Then he set fire to his staff and brought it to the sacrificial pile of corpses, where he threw the fire over it. The white mask began to understand the essence of the mad ritual. The orcs intended to resurrect their slain deity. As soon as the pile of bodies ignited, black tongues of magical energy began to emerge from the gray substance on the altar. The substance began to grow in size, and after gaining a critical mass, the creature burst out of it. With a shrill roar rushing into the air, the mythical snake Akasha stood in front of everyone. Our hero was very reassured by this situation, because now he could kill the already dead snake again for his reward. But the result of the resurrection could have been much better, since the snake fed on the life energy of the killed creatures. So the hero decided on a daring act. At War Camp 21, the lizard chiefs talked about how the orcs should not learn of the king's demise, because they would immediately decide to attack them. The lizard tribes have already been in a tense situation lately, and the death of their king has played a cruel joke on them. As soon as the guard left the commander's tent, he was stabbed in the back. The lizard fell dead with a knife in his back, and Henry stood behind him, carrying out his evil plan. He brought the corpse of an orc shaman with him and threw it beside the head of the lizard men. In order to cause panic in the camp and leave no traces, the heroes set fire to the tent. Here Kana's skill in making a fire came in handy. From the outside, it seemed to the lizard men that the orc had personally attacked the head, and everything ended sadly for the two. A series of camps were set on fire throughout the level, and various clans of monsters were also attacked. Due to this fire, the kobolds and dwarves that spread through the forests were forced to emigrate to neighboring territories, where they were encountered by other monster tribes. A breathless warrior ran into the goblin leader's chamber. He had an important message. The king was informed that the kobolds were ready to form an alliance to take revenge on the orcs. The goblins had old scores with the orcs from a long time ago, so they also linked the burning of their camps to the sabotage of the orcs. But the goblin king still could not understand why the orcs had unleashed such a large-scale war against them. An order was immediately given for a general assembly to advance to meet the allied monster tribes. At the rendezvous point, the goblin leader was greeted by troops of kobolds and warwargs. They declared that they were ready to unite with them for revenge against the orcs, who had killed their leaders. According to the king, even the wretched lizardmen have declared war against the orcs, and together with the trolls and ogres, they will give a worthy fight. The call for total war raised the morale of the army, and an army of monsters of thousands chanted calls for blood feuds. The army marched into battle, and Henry, the main culprit of the bloody ball, watched them high from the trees. Thanks to his sabotage, the monsters were forced to break the unspoken rules of the territories and enter into a full-scale war. This was to make a great sacrifice to the snake Akasha, multiplying its powers and the reward received from killing it. Anaran's elite first squad was assembled and occupied a tactical position near the orc camp, where the protagonist was to be stationed. Although the squad was elite, there was tension among them due to the arrogance of the two warring members. The senior officer separated them, saying that this was not the right place or time for quarreling, and that they would soon have to go hunting. The ground beneath the squad's feet began to vibrate violently, which distracted the men from swearing. Soon the cause of the shaking was discovered, and an entire army appeared over the horizon, advancing in their direction. A horde of monsters fled in the direction of the orc camp without looking back, their eyes burning like fires due to their rampant bloodlust. A squad of elite fighters froze in place like idols, with one single question: what was going on here? After recovering from the shock, the man ordered the others to retreat immediately. The monsters quickly caught up with the good-for-nothing people, and shouting at them, told them to get away as soon as possible or die. Like a tsunami, the monsters flew into the small squad and began to chop them to pieces. Pain couldn't let some pathetic monsters in his greatest sense so easily. In the heat of the fight, he noticed a goblin behind him who was preparing to throw his axe at him. It wasn't until he could turn around that Pain realized that he wouldn't be able to deflect this attack, as the axe was practically in front of his face. In his camp, the Orc King Parker did not understand why the lizardmen had waged war against them. He was informed that they had referred to the murder of their king, which infuriated the king, and he immediately ordered a defensive position. A smirk appeared on his face, for war could fully quench the thirst of their goddess Akasha. A defensive detachment of orcs with the last of their strength held the wall from a wave of unfriendly monsters of different races. The wall was an easy barrier for the trolls, and the weighty giants easily lifted the huge boulders above them. And with powerful blows, they punched holes in the orcs' defensive walls. As soon as the wall was destroyed, a bloody meat grinder began. Although that there were many attackers, the orcs were in no way inferior to them in battle. Standing behind, Parker commanded the troops, not engaging in battle because he was no longer needed. But then his gaze rested on his old enemy, who stood before him, telling him that the orc's days were numbered. The orc was filled with rage, and shouting Cranham's name, he charged at the enemy in a battle cry. The goblin reciprocated his opponent's feelings, and grabbing his favorite halberd, he rushed into battle. And our hero moved through the spires of the mountains with the ease of fluff, strengthening his skill further. He returned to the cave where the goddess Akasha had recently been resurrected, and even the sounds of monsters fighting could be heard here. The snake, intoxicated by the blood coming from the battlefield, devoured the orcs one by one. Followers could only run away from the fire breath in fear, believing that they had angered the goddess and that this was their punishment. Leaving only ruins from the cave and punishing all its followers, the snake was looking for a place of accumulation of chaos, which caused madness in it. Sensing the direction of the battle, she broke through the ground and began to rush towards the monster meat grinder. The hero could not miss it. After ascertaining where the snake had gone, the white mask began to think of a secret place where Akasha could rest from the outside environment. Because there must be a reason why such a powerful monster is on par with beginners. After exploring the caves for a while, he came across one icy cave completely covered in ice. In it was a boy with a sprout on his head, and in a meditation position, it was a white ginseng spirit. The orcs had been cultivating it with the power of the snake for 300 years, and the number of such spirit creatures in this world could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Henry intended to take all his strength for himself, but as the boy came closer, feeling threatened, he awoke from a deep sleep. His agility and fortitude were enough to send him up to the ceiling of the cave with a gentle push away from the hero. But this was not enough, since the main character has repeatedly hunted creatures similar to him. A couple of knives thrown by the hero hit the place next to the spirit. Gathering his spiritual energy, the boy let out a devastating roar that reverberated through the cave. This caused the stone slabs to shift, causing sharp icicles above the spirit's head to fall directly on him. The boy was forced to evade them in a hurry, otherwise it would have led to his death. It was a choice without a choice, for his maneuver had fallen directly into the hands of Henry, who had seized the spirit by the sprout on his head. Finding himself in a hopeless situation, the spirit resigned itself to its fate and turned back into ginseng. Henry took off his mask and began to devour the plant, absorbing all of its power and energy. Rumblings of increasing magical energy spread throughout his body, and at the same time, the hereditary skill of the dragon's body was restored to half. The hero began to clearly feel the magic currents running through his body, but his control over them was still weak. Anaran's first squad was completely defeated by a wave of monsters, and another one was seen showing signs of life among the bodies. Payne's will to live was at an all-time high, and he managed to survive the battle. Having lost his left arm, he was not going to back down from catching the white mask. So he took the sword in his remaining hand and leaned on it as if it were a crutch. He knew for sure that Henry was looking for a hidden artifact that no one had seen before, and his plan was to take everything from the protagonist at the right moment. In the meantime, the boy was learning new abilities. Now he could direct magical currents with the help of a skill into a weapon or body part. When he finished studying and removing the panel, Henry found a gold medallion under his feet. Picking it up and opening it, he found a family photo in it. It depicted Agil and his family. Now it is clear why he constantly hunted and why he needed Diana's tears. Therefore, the hunter imparted the necessary knowledge to kill the Akash, so it was necessary to return the desired item back to the owner. Having dealt with all the affairs in the cave, Henry, putting on a mask over his face, was already hurrying to his hunt for the snake. A fierce battle continued on the battlefield. Monsters, gripped by madness, as if under anesthetics, cut each other down. And the two kings had been torturing themselves with combat for a long time. Their strength and skill were equal, which is why the fight was so difficult for the two of them. As they locked their swords, they felt an unnatural loud noise and vibration rapidly approaching them from the ground. It was Akasha who came to the smell of blood, piercing the ground. She soared into the air above the battlefield. Everyone except the orcs had no idea what kind of terrible monster it was, and so they silently waited in fear for her actions. Opening her mouth to the fullest, she began to walk through the ranks of monsters, devouring dozens and hundreds of them in her belly. The Goblin King was worried about the appearance of a new monster that equalized the strength of his army to zero. With his decision made, he ended the battle with the orc, saying that the lives of his subordinates mattered far more. The orcs also did not stand aside. Having received the order to pacify the goddess, they all switched to the snake. The goblin was incredibly agile. He rose to the same level as the snake's head in one jump and was already aiming at the back of the snake's head. With his sharp halberd, he pierced her scales with a single blow, inflicting serious injuries on the orc goddess. The orc king did not want to stand aside and let his opponent shine brighter than he did. Running up to the snake's body, he began to chop it into minced meat with a series of sword attacks. Henry, biding his time on the sidelines, was delighted with his actions. The number of monsters was reduced to a minimum, and the snake grew to 1.5 times its original size. Despite its severe wounds, the snake quickly recovered at the expense of the monsters it had previously consumed. The Orc King was already badly beaten, but he still continued to press Akasha with his attacks. The only thing worse was his rival Goblin, who fell under the fiery flames of the snake and burned half of his body. This is the right moment that our hero has been waiting for so long. Having accumulated magical power in his legs, he pushed off the stone. This gave him a good acceleration, and also gave him the beginning of pumping the magic chain skill. He aimed directly at the snake's head, the deep wound left earlier by the Goblin King's blow. Immediately, he used a vampire skill to drain the life energy from the monster. The snake writhed in agony, trying to throw the hero off, but Henry's grip and skill left no chance of victory. The absorption did not last long, and the snake, completely dry, fell to the ground like a stone. But this was not the end. The white mass cut through the flesh of the snake and took out a golden sphere. This sphere is the energy of the Akashic snake. Its standard size does not exceed the size of a fist, an excellent raw material for absorption by the hero. The amount of pure energy was simply prohibitive, and the restoration of hereditary skills began instantly. Henry was overloaded, his body heavily, his eyes bloodshot, and he felt angry. The stunned kings whispered among themselves, not understanding who this guy was or what was going on. Looking at him, they were gripped by animal fear. The eyes of the white mask were the eyes of a predator. In order to maintain his pride and not lose his title, the exhausted orc ran towards the protagonist with a final attack. The two kings possessed the same strength as the former Lizard King, but now it was nothing to the strengthened Henry. As soon as the orc came within striking distance, the white mask cut off the head of the enemy with its blade. The orc's head landed at the goblin's feet, indicating his fate. Henry killed and devoured the monsters left on the battlefield. The monsters had little choice. Those who attacked the hero were killed, while others ran away from him in fear, untouched, as they were too weak. The rampage against the monsters continued. Less and less remained on my feet. And already in the defeated, he dug his sharp vampire fangs, sucking them out in the agony of screams. The thirst for absorbing the life force grew, as did the hero's skills. He felt that he was on top of the world, and that he could control everything. Waking up from the battle, leaving not a single monster alive, the hero was pretty tired and wanted to rest. But he felt the presence of a stranger nearby. Turning to him, the hero told him not to hide. Pain finally made it to the place. Surprised, he stepped out of the shadows, not understanding how he had been declassified. White Mask said that it was not difficult, as he easily caught the feeling of fear of the unfinished night. The Anarandovitz revealed that he had been watching the battle since Akasha's appearance, and knew that Henry had collected all the hidden items of the initial levels. They all have to belong to Pain, as he knows that the protagonist is no longer able to move due to fatigue and digestible energy. Our hero did not worry about this, knowing that there was another familiar character nearby who would not let him disappear. An arrow flew directly at the elite fighter from the mountains, killing him. In the distance, the familiar silhouette of a hunter in a hood with a bow appeared. It was Agel who came to the aid of the main character. The elf came to hear the sounds of the fierce battle that had taken place a couple of moments ago. There was no better time to appear. Immediately, Henry pulled the amulet out of his pocket, for there was not much strength left to keep himself conscious. Agel was confused and surprised by such a discovery of the hero, this thing was very dear to him. Handing over the pendant, the white mask fell on the dark elf's shoulders, immediately losing consciousness. Waking up in the hunter's house, the hero received many messages from the system about his current body status and skills. Henry had almost finished his dragon body and had perfected his magic chain skill to the limit. The protagonist was overwhelmed with amazing sensations. They were both familiar and varied. It was as if something new had appeared in his body, but at the same time so familiar and familiar. And along with everything else, Henry's sense of perception of the environment around him became very acute. Quietly, a dark elf entered the room, carrying a bowl of fruits full of vitamins to recuperate. Agel said he inspected the white mask in an attempt to help him regain his strength. The elf blamed the protagonist for mindlessly absorbing huge streams of mana and energy, which could lead to a deplorable embarrassment. He calmed the raging energy in the hero's body and channeled it with a circulating current. As he was about to leave the room, he turned around and said thank you with a smile on his face for returning the amulet. Henry immediately went outside to test his new strength, to which the dark elf told him to get plenty of rest and not to strain himself. After thinking better, the elf let the guy go, citing his high rate of recovery. This method of locomotion suited Henry like no other. His movements seemed as natural as possible. By directing the mana streams into different parts of the body, the hero strengthened himself. It only took 1% to notice a noticeable difference. After doing a somersault in the air, the guy landed on the ground, finished testing his new strength. He remembered that he still had uncollected rewards from the system, so he opened the menu and chose to receive the artifact. In his hand, an unknown black bracelet belonging to the owner of the Akasha materialized. He could absorb the souls of the dead. By casting a vampire spell on his hand, he activated the hidden synergy of these things. Dark energy encircled his body, and when it came into his eyes, it turned a charcoal color. As soon as this happened, a new world of ghosts hidden from him was revealed to his vision. They were monsters that had been defeated nearby, and Henry wondered how he hadn't earned the curse while among them. Taking out a mythical dagger, he began to collect the souls of the dead and enclose them in a bracelet. These souls could be used by him as artifact or skill boosts. Directing one soul into the blade, he cursed it, black flames bursting out of it. It was necessary to test how much stronger the weapon became from just one received soul. Striking into the air, he created a wave of curse that flew in the direction indicated by the hero, crushing everything in front of him. Hitting a huge stone boulder, he shattered it into pieces, the curse penetrating the very essence of the object and decomposing it. Now it was time to gather souls in order to find out how dark energy interacted with the abilities. Channeling a stream of souls into his hand, he transformed them into a floating dark magic sphere. By adding the ignition ability white to this ingredient, the mask created a dark ball of fire. It turned out to be enough power to overflow and blow it up right in the hands of our hero. Miraculously, the guy managed to jump away, thinking that such a force of the explosion was only from a couple of souls, and what kind of power would there be if there were a dozen of them? In addition to the bracelet, a goblin's eye was obtained which protects against curses and increases magic damage. And when combined with the second reward, the gem of the 5 races, which gave a boost to each species, a very powerful artifact was obtained. Henry returned to the hunter's hut and shared a glass of strong wine with him, the hunter saying that Henry was done with it. He realized this when he passed the lightning fast test, which the guy passed without much effort. Agel had the strong impression that he had met such a person before. Without betraying much significance, the elf handed over the reward left on the battlefield by Pain, his excellent mythical sword. The elf also shared with the hero that he started a feud with Honorand, endangering everyone who interacted with him. Doyle and Kana immediately came to mind, who were most likely already either captured or killed. Had Henry become so attached to them that he now cared about their fate? In the end, my brother was betrayed by his closest friend and 4 other important people. A camouflaged watch always hung on his chest as a reminder that he must avenge his brother. The answer for the protagonist as to what to do in this situation was obvious, despite the time coming to an end on the level. The elf offered his help, knowing that the boy was going to start a war with the guild, but Henry respectfully refused. At this, the hunter only smiled and wished the hero to be more careful, since he would not always be there for help at the right time. After thanking him for the rescue and warm welcome, the guy went on his adventure. With 4 days left for the war with Honoran and the completion of the training of the newcomers, there was no time to delay. so it was necessary to defeat the enemy in a day. Our hero's eyes were full of anger and hatred at the memory of the Blue Lily clan, one of whose leaders was to betray his brother. Build, meanwhile, was analyzing his dire situation. Not only had they not caught Henry, but they had lost their elite first squad. And the guild network, spread at the level of beginners, was completely destroyed by the main character. At the end of the training, he was waiting for a serious punishment from the clan. There was only one option left, with a mystical stone that was filled with the energy of living beings. But it was never finished. Therefore, a white mask was needed, and if they got hold of it and turned all their power into stone, they would put the guild back into the ranks in an instant. The build ordered the guild to comb the entire sector of the level in search of the hero and bring him to the castle. In the meantime, the leader himself went down to the hostages, greeting them mockingly. It was Doyle and Kana, exhausted by long tortures, hanging in a damp cellar chained to the wall. They were told that they would now become the raw material for replenishing the power of the stone, although earlier they wanted to stretch their energy for a longer period. Doyle was not afraid of death, but regretted his reckless act as he had endangered Kana. But their situation was completely hopeless. The villains were already coming out of the cage in order to bring the stone and start the procedure. Suddenly, the entire castle began to be crushed by powerful explosions taking place outside. An ordinary subordinate ran to report to the head that they had been attacked by one person. A fiery mushroom rose above the fortress, left behind by the protagonist's new explosive magic. The gathered guild members took up the defense of the courtyard, throwing a protective barrier over them and helping the wounded. As the dust began to settle, two demonic flames appeared in the depths of it, staring directly in the direction of the defenders. Using the power of the goblin's legs, Henry dashed into the thick of his enemies. His determination knew no bounds. Henry, being a master of melee combat, approached the enemy, causing him to stare at him in confusion. And with 3 precise blows, he plunged his blade into vital points, leaving no chance of survival. Holding an army bayonet in one hand and a mythical blade in the other, he killed the guild members one by one. The goblin's eye began to twitch and point to the direction from which the hidden threat to the hero's life was supposed to come. Listening to the advice of the eye, the young man jumped out of the dangerous place, and a second later, 3 swords flew in. Such a stab in the back should not go unanswered, especially since these craftsmen were now unarmed. All the low-level guards rushed into the scattering room, shouting that the attacker was not a human, but a demon. With up to 100 dead souls in reserve, the protagonist could materialize large black balls of energy in his line of sight. He pointed one of them right in front of one of the fleeing men, not forgetting to put fire magic into it. This led to an explosion of such powerful force that it tore a couple of people to pieces at once. Standing behind and watching as the white mask blew up everything in the area, the knights waited for reinforcements from among the more elite. But no one could escape Henry's eyes and heightened senses, so sensing stronger enemies, he turned his attention to them. At the top of the castle was the blurred silhouette of a knight. It was guild leader Build in full uniform and with his older brothers in arms. Seeing their leader with a large reinforcement, the fighters below perked up, thinking that salvation had already come. Build shouted furiously at the white mask that he had been hiding in the shadows like a rat all the time, and now he dared to show up to him like that. Build's wrath clouded his eyes with a white veil, and the aura of war spread through the air in powerful currents. Faced with the currents of the aura, our hero felt familiar motifs in it. This force seemed to have been encountered before. And then the white mask dawned on him. He definitely couldn't confuse it, since in the memories of his younger brother, there was a reference to it. One of Kyle's close friends, the last to plunge the traitorous sword into the body of their leader, was Leonta. And Lyant had his own henchmen, including Build, who on the day of the betrayal stood by and watched the terrible deed with a grin. It seems that Build will be the first on the list of revenge for his younger brother. Such a fateful meeting infuriated Henry. The hero began to prepare for the attack. He activated the skill of heightened senses and collected balls of mana around his body. Build only wanted to send a messenger to the island to report the attack, but his wish was interrupted by an explosion. The messenger fell flat on the stone floor. The explosion completely tore off his head, killing the messenger instantly. It was our hero's job, he shouted to Build, that it was disrespectful to be distracted from his opponent in the middle of a fight. Commander Honoran, taking a sword in each hand, told the hero that he was not going to run away from him, and that he would regret what he had done. With one powerful push, crushing the rocks beneath him, Build closed the distance between himself and the hero, counting on a quick victory. But Henry's skill and reflexes were prohibitively high, and the mask easily blocked the powerful blow. Using the tactics of hand-to-hand combat of the Special Forces, Henry ducked from the attacks and made a passage to the enemy's weak point. In turn, Commander Anaranda dodged the fatal blow, because he had received his rank and position for a reason. Henry began to tie the stories together. As Leonte dreamed of becoming the head of the guild, he took such a serious act and subsequently created his own. This meant that if our hero followed the trail of Anarand, he would definitely find one of his brother's traitors. Now the course of the battle began to change the vector of development, not in favor of Build. Under the onslaught of the hero's attacks, he could only defend himself. After reading his opponent in its entirety, the hero no longer wanted to drag out the battle for a long time. Jumping high enough to dodge the sword, the Spartan guy introduced his boot to Build's face. In Build's mind, there were only dilemmas about how the newcomer could become so strong. The protagonist told the commander that he was not a war at all, although according to his brother's memories, he thought otherwise. And now Henry was collecting mana to complete the battle. There was horror and despair in Build's eyes, as if there was a ferocious monster in front of him, ready to tear him to pieces in a second. The white mask brought the greedy commander to his knees, severing his arm with a single well-aimed blow. Build was stalling for time and trying to find a good chance, distracting our hero with questions about what he needed and how he became so strong. And then the moment came, his subordinates ran to the defense of their leader, becoming a human shield in front of the hero. Gathering the power of the dead and imbuing the dagger with special destructive properties, Henry was not going to spare anyone. A swing of the blade and a dark ball of energy sliced through the opponents in half. The enemies fell down under the weight of gravity, as if prostrating themselves before the greatness of our hero. Terrified, Build crawled away from Henry, who was approaching him, ordering everyone to protect him in the process. But no one would commit suicide of their own free will. Their comrades in arms shook in sweat like aspen leaves. Suddenly their minds shut down completely, and they limply went to attack the hero, forgetting about their sense of self-preservation. This was the work of Anarand's chip, which Build had implanted in all of his teammates to delay Henry in just such a situation, while the team leader ran for his other trump card. Knowing neither fear nor pain, the puppets lost their lives in the blink of an eye, one by one. Only a pitiful couple of minutes had passed, and all that remained of the crowds of puppets was a pile of dead bodies scattered all over the floor. Now all of Anarand has been wiped out, except for one survivor who briefly escaped from the hero. At this time in prison, Doyle said that they had acted too recklessly in this situation, and that Lady Luck had not rewarded them with her blessings. Kana, in turn, retorted to Doyle that they were in this position only because of his own initiative. Doyle didn't understand why all the responsibility had been shifted to him now, and Kana said that she had promised herself to confront her partner at least once before she died. Doyle admitted his mistake and remembered White Mask, who they thought was about to move to another sector. It's a shame that Doyle didn't share the hidden spot with the hero, but as soon as the captive said it, the door swung open for them and they saw their savior. Like an angel descending from heaven, the hero stood in the doorway and told Doyle that he would like to know about the hidden place now. The cunning fox said that he would tell about him later, after they got out, and he added that Henry could leave them for now so that they would not get in his way. To which the hero replied that all of Anarand had been destroyed except for Build, a news that pleasantly stunned Doyle. Once again, the trio was happy to have a common gathering, although the mask and Doyle did not show it much, continuing to tease and argue with each other. The old fox remembered that those scoundrels had spoken of sacrifices in the cellar, and that it was most likely that the last survivor of Anarand had gone there. When they all went downstairs together, they found themselves in foul-smelling dungeons, which by their appearance showed that there had been people here not so long ago. In alchemy, one of the most expensive ingredients is considered to be the human soul and flesh, but experimenting with them is too dangerous and forbidden in the tower. The hero understood that Anarand had gone too far in his endeavors, and he had to be stopped, only to find Build. Suddenly, Henry was surrounded on all sides by the ghosts of the people who had been killed here, and their number was very large. The White Mask asked them if they wanted to help take revenge on their offenders, to which the ghosts happily began to circle and grumble. Such a huge supply of souls pleased our hero, so he decided to offer them something interesting for it. Build hurriedly flew into the room like a hurricane, leaving behind bloody streaks of blood pouring from his severed right arm. The coveted black-brown-purple stone lay on a soft feather bed, waiting for its finest hour. How many human lives were given to complete it, since its color was so dark and the stone itself radiated a red aura of negativity? The artifact was intended for its leader to be reborn as a true king, but now the circumstances have changed dramatically. If the artifact was accepted as incomplete, it could overflow the bearer's vessel and tear it to pieces, and if completed, it should grant unimaginable powers. Build hoped that the stone was ready for use, but after eating it, nothing happened, which indicated failure. This threw the scoundrel into hysterics, but like a bolt from the blue, the hero's voice was heard behind him. This splinter in the fifth point infuriated Build very much. His teeth gnashed with anger, and the situation was very deplorable for the villain. Losing his mind and pouring out bile, he shouted at the hero, asking why he had annoyed him so much and what it was all for. Henry was able to respond to this with only one gesture. Taking off his mask and throwing it on the floor, he revealed a terrible secret to his enemy. In Bill's eyes, like a mirror of time, a familiar and long-forgotten silhouette of a face was reflected. So many shocks fell on the commander during the day, each of which was more shocking and demoralizing. Like a phantom, Kyle ghosted behind Henry, and they both spoke words about how much they missed old acquaintances. After mocking the scoundrel properly, the protagonist threw him to the ground and sat on top of him, listening to his pleas for mercy. Even so, the fate of the traitor seemed too easy, and then Henry's prepared punishment joined the fun. All you had to do was snap your fingers. Out of the void appeared the black silhouettes of ghosts, looking as if they had come from the most terrifying dreams. Justice triumphed today. The souls of tortured people in prisons could finally take revenge on their offender. Bill begged the hero to kill himself because he told him a lot of useful information about his clan and the people who were part of it. With tears in his eyes, the traitor could not accept his fate and pitifully asked not to be left alone with the avenging spirits of the slain. After going outside and waiting for the spirits to finish their business, the Henry returned after a while to the ruins of the fortress. Among the ruins, he found the burnt corpse of Build, who tried to get out until the end, but he never succeeded. As he got closer, he began to examine the crumbling remains of the body, trying to look for the artifact. When the body was completely blown away to the wind, it was replaced by a purple stone that the system could not recognize. The White Mask picked up a strange artifact, and it began to glow at the mere touch. After that, the glow disappeared, and the stone, like oil, began to melt in my hand and seep under my skin. Fully penetrating Henry's body, the clumps of energy of the stone began to flow towards his heart, forming a strong connection with the magic chain. It was an unpleasant feeling, but there was no effect. Only the system announced that this artifact was one of a kind and unfinished. After sorting out all the business in the ruined fortress of Anaranda, Henry met with Kana and Doyle in the mountains. The protagonist told his friends that Build was finished, which undoubtedly made his friends happy, but Kong was a little upset that she didn't do it. The former captives were too exhausted by the long imprisonment and could no longer continue their journey. They decided to refuse to undergo the tests. And as a thank you for everything, they gave him a bag full of their stored goods. It contained hundreds of spectacle pearls and a crown that they had taken as a reward for the Reptile King. These things were of no value to them anymore, and in the hands of the hero, they would greatly help in his development. This news and gift surprised the White Mask very much. He was told that the man had failed the passage and could participate in the ascent again. The younger brother did not say anything about it in his diary. If the hero had known this, he might not have done many stupid and ill-considered actions. Although the guy still did not regret anything he did here, and the gates for newcomers opened randomly in an arbitrary time interval. There was only one thing Doyle craved for his gifts. He wanted our hero to wipe the nose of the leaders of the rookie list. They were Pont and Adora, who in turn are the children of the leader of the One-Horn clan, and this clan is one of the most secret and powerful clans of the tower. Kana blamed Doyle for dumping his problems on our guy while putting him in danger. The cunning fox told the hero that they were giving up their seats to Henry, and in return, he would defeat them and take the first place. The protagonist agreed to the deal, which he was already going to fulfill, because his goal was to become the first among all. When he was done discussing the deal, the hero put on the crown to check his stats, which caused a storm of laughter from his comrades. Henry's appearance was too stunning to contain his emotions and not laugh, and Kanan noticed that our hero was very funny. Thanks to this crown, the hero was able to get into a hidden area that his friends told him about. Here, fighting his way through the crowds of echidnas, the guy got to the ferocious boss of the dungeon. Bleeding and striking him blow after blow, Henry landed to look around and strategize his fight. Echidna was a very combat-ready creature, so even for our hero, the battle was a very difficult test. Having finally slain the sinister echidna, the white mask turned its attention to the legendary sword, triumphantly shining with glory. With a sharp movement, like a hero from the legend of King Arthur, he drew his sword from the stone. Examining the sword, he was convinced that it was the same Vigret, the last piece that Doyle and Kana had prepared for Pont and Adora. The observer, who had been watching the scene closely, smiled snidely. Once again, the newcomer shows undoubtedly grandiose results. Once he was logged in, he opened the access settings and changed them. From that moment on, only the observer can see what is happening to our hero. An indicator appeared on the screen, confirming that access to the cameras that monitor the mask has been successfully blocked. After leaving Echidna's hideout, the aspiring adventurer saw the way to the final stage of the tutorial. High in the middle of the clear sky, the arena soared, with steps floating in the air leading to it. On this platform, the last test of newcomers took place. They had to take away experience points from others through fights. From its center came a powerful aura of a fighter. It was one of the leaders of the list of Pont rookies. Behind him stood his sister Adora, a single horn protruding from their foreheads, indicating their affiliation with a particular clan. The one-horned brother had an immeasurable amount of strength, and with just one kick on the ground, he caused a concussion. Ordinary recruits could only hope that their protection would somehow save them. Using his clan's secret techniques, Pont gathered the golden energy of life in his fists, giving them devastating buffs. No wonder their tribe was called Masters of Martial Arts. Legends about their exploits circulated throughout the tower. It seemed that there were no equals among the candidates in terms of strength, and this was confirmed by the flying bodies in the air after a couple of good blows from Pont. Everyone on this island just stood aside and prayed that no one would look at them. Apparently, no one could escape the fate of being beaten by a martial artist. The only thing that was disturbing about the whole scene was that his sister Adora stood mysteriously aside from what was happening, watching her brother with a cool gaze. Before parting, Doyle revealed that she was at the top of the list and very different from her brother. Looking into her eyes, there was a feeling of the abyss of the sea, her quiet nature hiding all the revealing secrets of her personality and possessing power. Henry didn't look at the girl for long, her reflexes telling her she was being watched closely, so she looked back. When their eyes met, a slight, playful smile appeared on the girl's face. The white mask knew that he would not be able to stay away from what was happening for long and would be quickly exposed. Therefore, the guy calmly walked to the center of the crowd, drawing everyone's attention to the fact that he began to take something out of his bag. It was a bag of pearls of experience. The main character poured it on the ground without hesitation, thereby loudly declaring himself to everyone around him. Such an act shocked everyone present, and there were shouts from the crowd that it would be better if he gave it all to them. An act so provocative was able to penetrate the emotions of even such a hidden person as Adora. The hero continued to quietly pour all his glasses out of the bag, while the newcomers estimated how many thousands he had scattered at his feet. Only after agreeing to the conversion of points did the hero combine them into one huge golden sphere. Everyone present immediately saw that for the first time in the entire tutorial, someone took the lead in the list of newcomers. The gap between the first and the second was almost twofold. But the surprises from our hero did not end there. The next on the way was the great sword Vigrid. The power of this sword was truly terrifying. Many of the newcomers did not even know that something like this existed in the tutorial. The amount of experience that could be gained for defeating the mask was enough for everyone, without exception, to rise significantly in the ranking. The first sword skill that Henry used was the Call of the Ancestors. It collected all the hatred of the previous sword wielders and increased the demonic power in proportion to the strength of the opponent. The loud roar of those emanating from the blade resounded in the ears of the enemy, disorienting and confusing their concentration. To begin with, our hero decided to deal with all the little things in order to leave the sweetest for the end. Having strengthened himself with demonic power and a sword, the protagonist ran like a shadow at the enemies. With a swing of his sword, Henry cut through the crowds of opponents, and they could only stand like idols. The survivors of the series of attacks were glad that they were still safe. Their mood no longer seemed so joyful and promising. At this point, another secret ability of the sword was revealed. When attacking, the skill Blessing of Poison was triggered, which slowed down and immobilized the enemy. The poison spread in a chain from the dead and wounded to those just standing nearby. When exposed to it, the victim could hardly breathe. This greatly simplified the hero's task of eliminating small fry. As in bowling, he broke through the ranks of newcomers. And now, when no one else could distract them, they could enjoy an equal fight alone with the one-horned ones. Always cheerful and ready for battle, Pont could no longer restrain his urges and prepared for battle with the guy by rubbing his fists. His eyes were already filled with golden fire, as the one-horned one showed his interest in the upcoming battle. Before the start, he turned to his sister and asked her not to tell her father anything, so that he would not scold him. With his sister's support and his secret, he could, regardless of the consequences, have a good time on the battlefield. The only thing he almost forgot was to hand over his glasses to his sister, because in the heat of battle, he could easily get carried away and lose them. Having received the orbs, Idora instantly outstripped our hero by 1.5 times. This showed how close these twins were. Not everyone can entrust such a thing to anyone. The Punt dreamed that our hero would fight to the fullest. The one-horned one was pretty hungry for good battles. The first technique he used was Thunderclap, a skill that was an exclusive secret passed down by the worshippers of the one-horned clan. Pont's strategy was painfully simple and ordinary. It involved beating up the protagonist and taking all his points. Alas, Henry didn't think so, and he wasn't going to stand silently like the rest of the newcomers, terrified of the approaching one-horned mountain. A powerful explosion rang out in the arena, accompanied by a column of demonic and golden energy. The entire platform was covered in clouds of dust and smoke. The scattered boulders and bodies told us about the power of the clashing sides. Standing at what Pont thought was a safe distance, he was energizing for the next attack, but his mask beat him to counter. At this point, the young prince's instincts told him of the grave danger that the next attack might entail. Standing in a defensive stance, he covered all the vital points of his body. Only the scars from which blood oozed indicated the severity of the blows. A smile appeared on Pont's bloodied face. Now his interest was completely absorbed in the battle and overcoming his opponent. Charging to the fullest, the one-horned one shouted that this fight would be legendary and that he would not leave a wet spot of our hero. Could the future heir of the one-horned king lose to a simple beginner in the initial stage of climbing the tower? This would have a bad effect on his relationship with his father. While Henry was busy deflecting and blocking the attacks of a formidable opponent, he studied the fighting style and watched the right moments for attacks. Standing under a barrage of attacks, Henry felt like a punching bag, beaten with a sledgehammer about 10 times a second. In the background was a sister who apparently had no intention of interfering or upset her brother. She looked at the hero strangely, her eyes with an unnatural golden glow. After a couple more inaccurate blows, Pont decided that he had the strength to hit the ground, causing our hero to soar into the air. A thick veil of dust was raised, through which the protagonist could not see, but he was reassured by the fact that Pont was also deprived of vision. I was gliding in the air, the white mask was sketching out plans of action, when unexpectedly for him, the one-horned man himself appeared behind him with a grin. With the first blow, he punched Henry's liver, immobilizing and confusing him. The experienced master could not miss such an opportunity, so he went through the punches all over the guy's body, ensuring his victory. Almost without strength and consciousness, our hero flew headlong to the ground, as if resigned to his loss. The icing on the cake was the fact that the Pant caught up with the hero in the fall. Grabbing him by the hair, he was properly aiming and preparing the final blow. And then something happened that was bound to happen sooner or later. Henry used the reversal of the clock left by his brother. The protagonist could use time rewind in exchange for a large supply of mana, thus predicting his future for 5 seconds. Now knowing that the prince would be behind him, he preemptively grabbed him by the arm to carry out countermeasures. While in the air, the mask now went behind the enemy's back and twisted his arm, bringing the enemy to a painful hold. Pont was a seasoned fighter, so he twisted his arm and tried in vain to attack the hero. It's time to repay your opponent with his own medicine, delivering an equally imperfect blow to the liver. Next came the legendary sword, already charged with demonic power, the Vigrid sword. Blow after blow swept through the one-horned man's body, knocking him completely out of combat formation. There was one last second that Henry could predict with his skill. In her time, he had to eliminate the last threat to himself. So pushing off in the air, the hero flew in her direction. Getting closer, the protagonist tried to take the princess with surprise, speed of decision-making, and speed of blows. Another moment separated the hero from the fact that he would no longer be able to predict the actions of his opponent, and so he threw his dagger between his attacks directly at the girl. As the clock showed, the one-horned woman could not expect such an attack, and the dagger was to hit the neck, inflicting a mortal wound. But something went wrong, and the girl deflected the blade, flying at her with her sword, contrary to the prediction made by the watch. The dagger flew to the ground with a whistle without bringing the desired result from it. A barrage of attacks was deflected by the slight movements of the girl's greatsword, and the girl herself entered the fight with a straight face. Tired of taking on so much, with one powerful swing, she forced the hero to retreat to a decent distance. Henry was standing on a relatively intact platform, which was not affected by Edora's blow, as our hero repelled the attack. The secret of the deflected blade was not lost on Henry, and he quickly realized that the power in Edora's eyes was to blame. He said that she used her eyes to read the enemy's future actions in battle. The girl confirmed that the hero had revealed her secret, and now it makes no sense for them to continue fighting each other. Our hero agreed with this assertion and obediently tucked the sword back behind his back, signaling the end of the battle. One Horn thought that the hero would give up all his points, but it turned out that by some miracle he got more golden experience orbs. The girl's face changed dramatically from menacing to completely incomprehensible where the masked golden balls came from. And then she looked at the belt where she had tied her golden orbs, and now it was as clear as daylight that Henry had somehow stolen them. It turns out that Endora's weakness was that she can only anticipate what enters the field of vision of the eyes. The previous attack with the knife was not in vain, because the dagger bounced off the blade and cut the ropes flying past the belt. By some miracle, all this was calculated by our hero, or he was fabulously lucky. And at the moment, the list of leaders was again headed by a white mask under an unknown pseudonym, and from 100,000 points exceeded 500,000. Never before in the initial stage has anyone collected so many experience points. The average leader of the list has always been around 100,000. Just as the girl was about to hold the stranger, Henry used his lightning step skill and disappeared into a secluded place. The first defeat and complete defeat in the tutorial fell to the lot of the one-horned twins. A second passed, and the girl's face quickly changed, saying how cool our hero was, and a crimson blush shone on her cheeks. The hero returned from the platform back to the ground in the quiet and calm forest. He sat on a rock waiting for the end of the stage of the tournament because there were only seconds left. The system notified all participating newcomers about the end and moved everyone at once to the place where the achievements were announced. Rumors were actively circulating in the crowd of people about a stranger who had defeated the one-horned ones and never showed his face. Here Henry met his very first acquaintance, Julius. He saw the hero and happily ran up to him and greeted him. The protagonist noticed with his vision that the boy had changed a lot since their last meeting. Now he was more confident in himself and his abilities. Julius said that he had found a mentor for himself who helped him in mastering his powers, and he also thanked Henry again for helping him. The boy did not detain the hero for too long and hastily said goodbye and retired to his mentor. The mask noted that she did not expect that Julius would be one step closer to entering the tower, but certainly this fact pleasantly surprised him. Suddenly, a portal appeared on a tall white stone platform, from which a familiar voice sounded, greeting the gathered participants. A goblin of medium height came out of the portal and introduced himself as the administrator of this tutorial. He praised everyone for the work done and invited everyone to take a look at the leaders of the rating of this walkthrough. Many who didn't make it to the arena in the last sector didn't even know what happened there, and so the news came as a shock to them. The hero noticed that his back was burned by the evil gaze of the prince, who did not resign himself to defeat. Edora, on the other hand, was quite easy to see the stranger in the white mask again, who pleasantly surprised her with his antics. Literally in a whisper, she said congratulations to the main character then he could easily read them on their lips. And when he looked at her with the dragon's eye, he saw that her words were sparkling, unlike his brother, who was filled with anger. Now it's time to reward the winner for his brave services to the system, even though the hero himself has not yet chosen a name for himself. A panel opened in front of the guy with messages about the receipt and acceptance of gifts given for the occupied place. At the snap of the administrator's finger, the functions of the system responsible for issuing rewards began to be brought to execution. The grand prize came in a blue box with a question mark on the sides. The item had to be unknown to the average player. It was the key to the gates of Zeus. Many newcomers considered it useless and simply lost it or threw it away. But as they walked further along the tower, they began to regret their action. At this point, the festivities were coming to an end, and the goblin, clapping his hands and laughing happily, said that the newcomers could proceed to the exit. In the best traditions of gentlemanly etiquette, the administrator bowed to his audience under a bright light as a farewell gesture. After receiving the rewards, watching the administrator ascend, Henry felt calm and relieved. For the first time in a long time, he could exhale and relax a little. It was the turn of the adventurers to leave the gathering place, indicated by a glow in the floor. Then the hero was called by a rough male voice. It was Panth, who praised the strength of our hero and noted his military merits. He wondered what kind of artifact the White Mask had used in the fight with him, and to find out, the One Horn offered a rematch. Henry was not at all interested in the proposal, and the new acquaintance, who now apparently would not be far behind the guy. Breaking his silence, the protagonist raised his hands and said that he surrendered to the prince. After all, the noble heir to the throne would not attack a surrendered person. From such a turn, Ponce's brain gave out a systemic error and stopped processing thoughts. This delay was enough for our hero to completely fall into the portal on the ground, leaving the enraged antler in complete discontent. When the rookie phase came to an end and everyone involved was able to enter the main world, they began to spread rumors about an unknown hero. For the first time in history, someone scored so many points, in addition to collecting all the hidden artifacts and defeating the One-Horned Twins. Now Henry became the subject of discussion and interest of many people from all walks of life. A species that could only appear to man in dreams was now right in front of our hero. This is Blackrock, a fantasy medieval city with a huge obelisk tower in the center, where traders and the ruling elite were located. Now this is the real beginning of the story for our hero, because from that moment his hunt and victorious conquest of the tower began. Walking around the city with a photo left by her younger brother, the mass searched for the place where it was taken. The image in the center showed Kyle at his best time, when the guild was just gaining momentum and everything was very good. A couple of minutes later, a similar house was found in the background. A blacksmith's plaque, battered by time, hung at its entrance. Henry carefully walked into the room after the knock and asked if anyone was there, but there was no answer, and the room itself looked very shabby. It felt like the forge was abandoned if it weren't for a bunch of high-level weapons lying around. And among all the good, there were some that the protagonist could not study even with the gaze of a dragon. Suddenly the door swung open and a short dwarf stood in the doorway, holding materials for the work. The dwarf was very stocky and tan from constant work near the hot stove, and he had apparently never cut his hair in his life. Kyle called to him by his name Hen in his diary. For him in this world, he replaced his father, lost as a child. The old man asked the boy in a disgruntled voice what he had forgotten in his forge, to which Henry replied that he wanted to buy a weapon. Pretending that he did not want to see the stranger anymore, the dwarf replied sternly about refusing to sell the weapons, as the place was in too poor a state. Deliberately stepping closer, Hyun shoved his shoulder into the guy's stomach, adding to the trail for the guy to stay away. The dwarf knew that the dwarf was the closest friend of Artia's clan and always helped her out with the best weapons. So Henry asked the old man if it had anything to do with Artia's collapse. So many positive memories in my brother's diary were associated with this grumbling old man. After the collapse of the guild, other guilds began to take over Henom, which made him lose sight. The guy said if this is the case, then Grandpa does not have to worry. Although the dwarf agreed, he demanded money from Henry for his wages, without which the pus simply would not work. The White Mask began to lay out on the floor various components that had been collected earlier. Although they were not particularly valuable individually, they made excellent artifacts. Most of all, the sagacious Henom was interested in things that could not possibly be in the hands of a simple beginner. In so many years of work in the craft business, Hunom has reached an incredible level of appreciation for the equipment of wanderers at a glance. The guy, without stopping, began to take out the awards for the first place, which made the dwarf hysterical. The helmet belonged to the former Lord of the Tower, who had ruled with the Vampire Lord many years ago. As a result, the protagonist agreed with the dwarf that he would make him an artifact in exchange for protection from attacking clans and one bloody knife of unknown quality. Ever since the guy last activated the clock, the hands began to move, albeit very slowly. Evening came. The mask went about its business peacefully, but something told him of an impending threat. The skills worked perfectly, as figures of different people were already appearing in the alley. They were hunting the already famous newcomer. They knew that he always had expensive artifacts with him. Such lovers will never be able to catch our hero in their lives. Turning into an alley, Henry disappeared from sight of enemies. By moving behind the barricades blocking the other passage, he freed himself from a useless waste of time. The guy was next in the tavern, giving the seller a bag of coins. He asked for a place on the terrace. With pleasure for such a sum, the innkeeper accompanied the hero to the very top of the establishment, where a gorgeous view of the night city opened. While enjoying the views, the protagonist asked for coffee without syrup and also found out if they used artificial beans. The reason Henry was in this place was because Kyle used to come in. In general, during his stay in this city, the mask has already managed to visit all of his brother's favorite places. Although the people of the city don't particularly find him attractive, the younger brother still liked to go to different places. Still in his home world, he never gave bad advice. Sitting comfortably and proudly alone, the boy delved deeper into Kyle's memories. What was it like to sit here and laugh with his friends, and what the little brother was thinking about at such moments? Walking through the city at night, Henry decided to visit the dwarf again, who was working non-stop to create an artifact. Irritated, the dwarf shouted that he had forgotten the guy here, to which the mask said that she was just bored and decided to watch the work. This infuriated the blacksmith even more. He was too infuriated by the fact that the hero never listened to him and was constantly calm. Running to the anvil, the dwarf grabbed the hammer and prepared to throw it at Henry. Throwing down a heavy tool, he shouted after him that he wouldn't let him just chill out in his work area. Catching the hammer as an experienced American football player, Henry agreed to this adventure without hesitation. Meanwhile, in the tutorial at the ruins of the fortress of the former Guild of Honoranda, proceedings were being held. The members of the Blue Lily clan were looking for reasons for the failure of their experiment. They had spent too much effort to create the stone. The chief detective was Lyant, one of the 5 leaders of the clan and the former leader of Ardia's guild. The old dwarf sipped tobacco sweetly from his pipe, thinking about teaching the young specialist new skills. After arguing a bit about the reasons for his interest in the craft, the dwarf reluctantly agreed, citing boredom. Now Henry recognized the Henom described by his brother in his diary. Looking stern and constantly cursing, the dwarf was still a very kind old man. The next day they began their training, as evidenced by the screams coming from the forge outside. For every mistake or slight transgression, the dwarf punished his apprentice with strong blows and loud words. Despite this, Henry continued to learn the trade, oblivious to the irritable master. And yet in his head, Hunom noted the incredible speed of his students' learning. It was enough to say once to teacher correct. From the outside, it was impossible to distinguish a guy from an average blacksmith. Each of his blows fell exactly at the right point. Hyenom remembered his best student, who was also excellent. In general, they were similar, but the devil was in the details, or rather in their characters. Hinoma felt that he was getting older, overreacting to the memories of the past. The dwarf could not afford such tenderness, so he collected his thoughts and threw the pipe at Henry and scolded him for the ruined part. Returning home from training, the hero reflected on the fact that there were still people who did not betray his brother. Therefore, Henry could not allow the dwarf to die after completing the creation of the artifact. He planned to leave the forge so as not to bring trouble. And he will go to conquer the tower, where the past of his younger brother and high-level players who needed revenge are waiting for him. Unexpectedly for the hero, strange personalities came out of the shadow of the alleyway. They had orders not to let anyone near Hinoma's forge, and the white mask had already been warned. The bandit was outraged by the impudence of the newcomer. If he took the first place, it did not mean that he automatically became the strongest of all. To which the hero replied that he would gladly kill them all, thereby making life much easier for his teacher. This was the last straw for the scoundrel, Unable to withstand such an insult, he rushed to the attack. But before he could unsheath his sword, the hero vanished without moving a single step, like a shadow dissolved in the darkness. The bandits turned out to be ordinary village bouncers. Because of this, one of them did not notice how the hero moved behind his back with a knife. Like a cat playing with a mouse, the guy cut the tendons and other non-lethal points of his opponents. White Mask honed his hand-to-hand combat techniques, not even bothering to use his mana and spells. The bandits fell to the ground one by one, but they were still alive. It was clear from the expressions on the faces of the fools that they had made a serious miscalculation at the moment when they decided to attack the newcomer. To be fair, not everyone deserved mercy, and in order to get the necessary information, the hero left only a part of the villains alive. Remembering the training of the special forces in javelin throwing, our hero threw his sword at one of the remainder. The brutality with which Henry dealt with the scoundrels struck every conceivable and unimaginable spectrum. The leader bounced silently and terrified, just stood aside while the hero took his sword out of the corpse's head. Terrible thoughts came to the bandit. He already understood that the role of the hunter had passed into the hands of the White Mask. So it was the turn of the scoundrel, who dared to threaten not only Henry, but also his close Henema. Now the guy, like a king, put his shoe on the head of the enemy, showing where his place was. Trembling in fear, the bandit muttered to himself that this was just a dream, and that a person who had just finished a tutorial the other day could not be so strong. The protagonist did not like the past tone of the scoundrel's conversation, and so he decided to bring him to his senses with a powerful blow to the ground. One of the survivors dared to say that our guy would regret what he had done when his boss sent the guys to kill the old blacksmith. The bandit's recklessness and stupidity was immeasurable, because Henry took it personally. Strangling him with the fool's hands, the guy told the rest that he only needed one person to take him to the main one. Here again, the leader of the bouncer squad distinguished himself. Without missing a second, he handed over everyone with giblets. He postponed his death for a short period of time, and the second one was much less fortunate because he delayed. The two of them were going to go and clean up the mess among the unscrupulous people who thought they were superior to the rest. But first the hero visited the dwarf, who sat in the middle of the ruined forge with his head bowed in sorrow. At the sight of Henry, the old man was delighted. The apprentice promised that this would be the last such occasion. A criminal organization calling itself the Night's Watch had a bad reputation in the city due to its association with another powerful clan. They needed to be stopped, and at the same time return the stolen items from Heneva, so he and the survivor went straight to the bandits' rally point. So our couple came to the evil place where all the rot of this city accumulated. With the help of Dragon Vision, Henry learned how many people were in the building and where they were located. The door swung open and a colleague walked in, greeted with banter by his comrades, but they had no idea who he had brought with him.